A breath of wind moves across the Ethiopian highlands, soft, ancient, alive. Mist clings to the mountains. The sound of distant drums fades into the dawn. Before there were borders, before there were kings, there was a land that remembered everything. Here, empires rose from patience, and hope was carved in stone. Merchants crossed oceans. Builders carved sanctuaries from rock, and warriors defended freedom on sacred soil. This is the story of a civilization that never forgot its heartbeat, a people who turned endurance into art. If you could walk through 1,000 years of memory, what would you notice first? The hands that built, the hearts that endured, or the silence that still remembers them all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if the past still speaks to you, gently tap like and subscribe to journey further through time. Now dim your screen, let the air grow still, and step into the highlands where time itself never truly sleeps. The air over the Ethiopian highlands has always held a certain stillness, an ancient calm that seems to hum beneath the wind. In the soft light of dawn, the mountains shimmer like sleeping giants, their slopes veiled in mist. Below them, rivers carve deep scars through the red earth, winding toward unseen horizons. Long before empires, before kings and banners and carved stone, this land was already alive, a world of quiet strength and patient creation. Here, in these highlands, the story of humanity begins. The earth still carries the bones of its earliest children, the remains of ancient beings who walked upright for the first time. They moved through tall grass and scattered acacia trees, watching the same sun that rises over these ridges today. The land remembers their footprints. Every gust of wind that sweeps the Rift Valley carries whispers of their existence, a soft reminder that before there were nations, there were wanderers, and before there was civilization, there was survival. Time moved slowly then, measured not by calendars or kings, but by the rhythm of rain and drought. The early people of this region lived by the pulse of the land. They hunted where the herds moved, gathered fruits and roots, and learned the paths of rivers as one learns the lines of a hand. Over generations, they began to shape their world. Stone tools appeared, simple, deliberate, and powerful. Fire became their ally. And from that moment, the highlands glowed at night with the light of humanity's first defiance of darkness. The land changed with them. Forests receded, grasslands opened wide. In time, these early communities began to settle. They built small clusters of homes from mud and straw, ringed by fields where seeds of barley and teff grew. The first farmers learned the patience of the seasons, the art of trusting the soil. In the evenings, smoke drifted above their huts, rising into a sky so filled with stars it seemed endless. The people sang as they worked, songs about rain, soil, and the quiet gratitude of life itself. The highlands shaped their character. To live here was to live with extremes, heat and cold, dryness and flood, isolation and abundance. The terrain was steep, the roads few. Yet from these challenges came a certain endurance, a kind of harmony between humanity and the earth. Those who survived here learned not to conquer nature, but to move with it. Their lives were woven into the rhythm of the mountains. As the centuries turned, these small communities grew more complex. They traded with one another, following trails that snaked through valleys and across plateaus. From the lowlands came salt and obsidian, from the highlands, grain and hides. Trade was slow but steady, carried on the backs of donkeys, camels, and human will. Along these paths, language began to take shape, and with it, identity. It was through exchange that culture was born. Travellers from distant regions began to arrive, from the Nile, from the deserts to the east, from the coast where the Red Sea touched the horizon. They brought with them new ideas, new crafts, and the seeds of future civilizations. The people of the Highlands, resilient and curious, absorbed these influences without losing their essence. Over time, their homes grew larger, their tools finer, their stories longer. They carved symbols into rock and stone, spirals, lines, and markings whose meanings are lost, but whose beauty remains. Perhaps they were prayers, perhaps they were memories. Whatever their purpose, they reveal something timeless. The human desire to leave a mark, to speak across ages. The natural world provided both challenge and inspiration. The mountains, with their sheer cliffs and hidden valleys, taught protection and patience. The rivers, sometimes calm and sometimes furious, carved the land into shapes both beautiful and harsh. The people who lived here learned to respect the unpredictability of it all. Even today, when the thunder rolls across the highlands, it carries the same raw power that shaped the first villages and their stories. As communities grew, they began to organize. Leaders emerged, not kings yet, but elders, hunters, and wise ones who could read the land and the seasons. They guided their people through floods and famine, through harvest and drought. Their knowledge was not written in books, but remembered in words, passed from one generation to the next, like fire from one hearth to another. From this slow accumulation of wisdom, a culture began to form, one rooted in endurance, in respect for the land, and in memory. The people learned to build terraces to tame the slopes, to channel water into their fields, to store grain for the long dry months. They crafted pottery with patterns that mirrored the hills, tools that fit perfectly in the hand, and ornaments shaped from stone and bone. These were not yet the marks of empire, but they were the foundation of civilization. To the east, where the mountains descended toward the sea, early trade networks began to stretch further. Small ports and coastal villages became gateways between the African interior and the wider world. Across the narrow waters lay Arabia, and beyond it, the ancient world of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Goods began to flow: spices, ivory, gold, and salt. The highlands, once isolated, became part of a growing web of connection. Through these exchanges, the region learned the art of adaptation. It absorbed foreign techniques, new ways of metalworking, new crops, new words, and made them its own. The people of the highlands never simply copied, they transformed. What entered Ethiopia left changed, moulded by the same character that had shaped the land itself. As the centuries passed, these threads of culture, trade, and language began to weave into something larger, something that would one day take the shape of a kingdom. The mountains that had once been barriers now became walls of protection. The plateaus, high above the plains, offered both isolation and advantage. From this landscape, identity hardened like stone. By the time the world beyond began to build its first empires, the highlands were already ancient in their own way, filled with people who had learned to live both with and within the earth. Their cities were still to come, their rulers still to be named, but their roots ran deep. They carried within them the quiet knowledge of thousands of years. that survival is not won through conquest alone, but through balance, memory, and endurance. If you walk through those same valleys today, you can still feel it. That hum beneath the soil, that ancient pulse of time. The wind moves through the grass, whispering across stones older than memory. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd calls to his flock, his voice rising into the air exactly as it did 1,000 generations ago. The story of Ethiopia does not begin with a crown or a monument. It begins here, in the earth itself, in the patient shaping of life by landscape. The Highlands were humanity's first teacher, and their lessons were clear: to endure, to adapt, to remember. Long before the word empire was ever spoken, this land was already preparing for it, quietly, steadily, with the slow grace of mountains waiting for the dawn. Morning light spills across the northern highlands, turning the red soil gold. Between the hills, smoke rises from cooking fires. Goats pick their way over terraces carved into the slopes. The land hums with quiet purpose. Out of these scattered settlements, a pattern is beginning to form. Roads meeting at market squares, rulers setting their marks on clay and stone. What was once a web of villages is drawing together into something larger. Aksum is being born. The mountains seem to lean inward around it, as if guarding a secret. Streams pour from the high ridges into fertile valleys. Travellers climb narrow paths with packs of salt and obsidian on their shoulders. They stop in small towns, where traders gather at dawn, exchanging grain for hides, glass beads for ivory. Coins and metal ingots pass from hand to hand. Voices rise in many languages. The air carries the smell of barley bread and fresh-cut cedar. It is here, in this meeting place of mountains and trade routes, that a kingdom begins to take shape. At first, it is only a name whispered among merchants, Aksum, the place where caravans meet the sky. Then come the markers of authority, boundary stones, storehouses, fortifications. The people of the plateau are no longer just farmers and herders. They are builders, traders, administrators. They are beginning to see themselves as part of a single world. From the northern deserts come lines of camels bearing salt. From the lowlands, tusks of ivory. From across the Red Sea, ships arrive with textiles, glassware, wine, and incense. Aksum becomes the highland heart that beats between continents. Its merchants learn the rhythms of the winds that carry ships across the sea each season. They keep calendars, record exchanges, measure weight and distance. Trade becomes more than survival, it becomes language. In the royal enclosure at the city's centre, masons lift stones that seem too large for human hands. They cut them precisely, edge to edge, stacking them without mortar. From these foundations rise tall monuments that reach toward the clouds, obelisks carved with lines and windows, imitation doors and false stories told in stone. The tallest stand more than 30 meters high. Their surfaces shimmer under the sun, announcing a new kind of confidence, a civilization certain of its place beneath the sky. Around the monuments, life unfolds in quiet rhythm. Potters turn clay on slow wheels, shaping jars for oil and grain. Blacksmiths hammer copper and bronze. Women weave cloth dyed in indigo and ochre. The city smells of smoke, iron, and fresh grain. At the edges of the marketplace, children chase one another through the dust, laughing in the same language that echoes through the inscriptions now being cut into granite. The written word has reached the highlands. Scholars and scribes carve characters into stone, an alphabet adapted from the scripts of Arabia, but reshaped by local tongue and rhythm. These markings will become giyes, the written language of the Highlands for centuries to come. It is a sign not of conquest, but of connection. Ideas carried across sea lanes, translated into something new. Aksum's rulers understand the power of symbols. They mint coins from gold, silver, and bronze, the first in sub-Saharan Africa. On one side appears the image of a king, on the other, a crescent or a disc, signs of order and authority. The coins travel far beyond the borders of the kingdom, found later in the markets of India and the sands of the Nile. Each coin is a small declaration. Aksum trades not as a follower, but as an equal. The city grows upward and outward. Palaces rise on terraced hills. Gardens are watered by channels cut from mountain springs. Stone cisterns catch the rain. The hum of industry fills the air. Spinning wheels, millstones, hammers, the low chant of work songs. At night, the fires of Aksum burn like a constellation, each light a promise that the world has turned a little closer to civilization. Yet even in prosperity, the people of the Highlands live close to the natural world. They read the seasons in the flight of birds and the tilt of the moon. They build terraces not only to feed their fields, but to keep the soil from washing away in the rain. Their architecture mirrors the landscape, stepped, layered, patient. Nothing here defies nature, it collaborates with it. From the ports along the Red Sea, the kingdom's influence spreads. The harbour at Adulis becomes the voice of Aksum to the world. Ships from distant coasts crowd its waters, their sails striped in bright colours. The sound of carpenters repairing hulls mingles with the calls of traders, shouting prices in Greek, Arabic, and the local tongues. Camels kneel under bales of myrrh and sacks of grain. Fishers haul nets glistening with silver bodies. It is a place where everything moves, goods, stories, ideas. A traveller leaving Adulis can carry a fragment of the Highlands to any shore touched by the Indian Ocean. The rulers of Aksum know that trade brings not just wealth but knowledge. They invite travellers to their courts, navigators, mathematicians, scribes, people who measure stars and seasons. From them, they learn of faraway kingdoms, of new crops, of medicines made from herbs beyond the mountains. Some visitors stay, marrying into local families, bringing new blood and custom. Aksum's identity becomes both deeply rooted and open to the horizon. Generations pass, and the city matures. Its rulers extend roads through the highlands, connecting farms and markets. They establish outposts in fertile valleys, collecting tribute in grain and livestock. Stone pillars mark territory. Carved inscriptions record victories and treaties. Yet the tone of these records is often practical, even modest. The power of Aksum lies less in conquest than in organization, in its ability to hold together a mosaic of peoples and landscapes. At the height of its strength, Aksum stands among the great powers of its age. In distant lands, chroniclers speak of a kingdom in the clouds, a place of tall towers and rich earth. Merchants who have seen it tell stories of green mountains rising straight from the desert, of cities built from solid stone. To them, Aksum seems almost mythical, a civilization hidden at the roof of Africa, where the air is thin and clear. Inside the city, life continues with unhurried rhythm. Markets open with the first light. Traders from the coast spread their wares. Beads from India, perfumes from Arabia, bronze mirrors from beyond the sea. Farmers arrive from the countryside leading donkeys loaded with grain and honey. By noon, the square is a whirl of movement, negotiation, laughter, the clink of coin. By dusk, it empties again, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the smell of cooling earth. As night falls, the tall stelae catch the moonlight. Their shadows stretch across the ground like the memory of generations. The city quiets, but it does not sleep. Somewhere, a scribe bends over a tablet, finishing an inscription that will outlast him by centuries. Somewhere else, a blacksmith hammers out a new blade while the fire throws sparks into the dark. And high on the terraces, a ruler stands at his window, watching the stars wheel slowly above his kingdom. He does not know how long his empire will endure. He knows only that for this moment it stands whole, a meeting of mountain and sky, of sea and soil, of people bound together by trade, memory, and the will to endure. He lifts his eyes toward the horizon, where the faint glimmer of the Red Sea lies beyond the ridges, and feels the vastness of his world. The winds that sweep through Aksum tonight will travel far. They will cross deserts, seas, and centuries, carrying with them the scent of cedar smoke and carved stone. Long after the towers fall and the coins tarnish, the idea of Aksum will remain. The vision of a civilization built not on conquest, but on connection. In the silence that follows, the city seems to breathe. The fires fade, the stars brighten, and the mountains hold their watch. The kingdom of stone and sky has found its voice. Its story is only beginning. Stories are the oldest architecture a people can build. Long before the first palace or wall, words form the foundations of belonging. In Aksum, as in every enduring civilization, legend became mortar for memory. While stone could crumble, stories could travel, retold around fires, carried by traders across deserts and seas. They bound together farmers and nobles, merchants and soldiers, giving shape to the idea of Ethiopia before any map defined it. Among those stories, none travelled farther or lasted longer than the tale of the wise king and the faraway queen. The names changed with language and time, but the rhythm stayed. Two realms meeting, knowledge exchanged, and from that meeting, a lineage born. Whether told in the cool courtyards of Aksum or along the caravan trails to Arabia, the story served a purpose larger than fact. It explained connection. It gave the Highland Kingdom a place in the vast tapestry of the world. Merchants returning from distant markets spoke of ancient courts beyond the sea, of kings famed for judgment and cities paved with marble. Listeners imagined their own ancestors in conversation with such rulers, equals across the waters. In those imaginings grew a belief that Ethiopia's royal lines were not merely local dynasties, but branches of a universal tree of wisdom. The tale became a mirror, reflecting dignity back upon those who told it. Scribes eventually set the story to parchment. They wove the details with care, journeys across deserts, riddles exchanged, gifts offered, covenants sealed. The legend's truth was never in measurement, but in meaning. It spoke of curiosity rather than conquest, of learning that flowed in both directions. It suggested that greatness was born not from isolation, but from encounter. Within Aksum and the kingdoms that followed, this myth shaped how power was understood. Rulers claimed descent not just from heroes, but from wisdom itself. Their authority rested on the idea that they were heirs to an ancient dialogue between lands. that knowledge and virtue could pass through generations like sunlight through glass. It was an origin story that dignified both the people of the mountains and those beyond the sea. Artists and craftsmen translated the legend into form. Carved panels showed caravans winding through hills. Musicians composed songs about distant queens who travelled for understanding rather than war. Even the design of royal jewellery echoed the theme. Patterns of interlaced circles, two worlds touching yet remaining distinct. The myth gave aesthetic coherence to a civilization spread across climates and languages. In the villages, storytellers adapted the tale for their own lives. A shepherd might tell it as a parable of hospitality, how generosity to a traveller brings blessing. A potter might emphasize the exchange of gifts, clay for gold, art for wisdom. Parents told their children that from such a meeting came the strength of their people, the ability to learn from others without losing oneself. The legend became less a story about kings than a quiet lesson about curiosity and respect. Beyond this single myth, other narratives blossomed. There were accounts of mountain spirits, of rivers that chose their own paths, of architects who listened to stone. Some stories reach back to the dawn of settlement, when ancestors coaxed crops from dry soil. Others explained why the rains came late, or why certain animals were sacred to particular valleys. Each tale stitched local experience into the larger cloth of identity. Together they formed an unwritten library of how to live in a land of extremes. As literacy spread, monks and scribes began collecting these oral traditions. They did not sort them into true or false. They preserved them side by side, understanding that a people's imagination is as telling as its records. From their work emerged chronicles that blended genealogy, geography, and legend, texts that read half like history, half like poetry. They described cities founded by dreamers, wars ended by clever words, dynasties descending from starlight. To modernize, they may appear embellished, yet within them lies a precise record of values, wisdom, endurance, justice, and reverence for the land. Aksum's kings used this narrative heritage as a tool of unity. When diverse regions came under their influence, myths served as bridges. A ruler could point to the shared ancestry of his subjects, real or symbolic, and turn difference into belonging. In the absence of centralized bureaucracy, story did the work of law. It reminded farmers in distant valleys that their harvests fed the same realm as the markets of the capital, that they were all part of a lineage stretching beyond memory. Over centuries, the tales adapted to new times. When trade expanded and foreign ships brought new tongues, the legends absorbed fresh details. Strangers heard familiar echoes and added their own versions. What had once been a local myth became a dialogue between civilizations. In that sense, the stories were early ambassadors. They travelled faster than armies and built alliances where treaties could not. Travellers who visited the Highlands often left written impressions of what they found, a people proud of their ancestry, skilled in craft, and steeped in story. To them, Ethiopia seemed a place where history and myth were not opposites but partners. They observed how festivals reenacted ancient encounters, how songs of everyday life borrowed verses from royal legend. Narrative was woven through society like thread through cloth. As generations passed, the myths deepened rather than faded. Every retelling reaffirmed continuity. When droughts or wars unsettled the land, people turned again to these stories for reassurance that their lineage had survived worse before. legends became a quiet form of resilience. They told the people that they were part of something long, unbroken, and meaningful. Archaeologists centuries later would find the material echoes of these tales, inscriptions listing dynasties that trace their roots to mythical forebears, burial stelae aligned with celestial patterns described in song. Such findings reveal not deception, but aspiration, a civilization using imagination to place itself within the cosmos. The power of Ethiopia's myths lay in their inclusiveness. They did not erase local traditions, but gathered them. Aksumite, Agao, Saho, Afar, and countless others found room within the national memory. A story told in the northern highlands could meet another from the southern plains, and together they would form a third version, richer and more complex. The process mirrored the landscape itself, diverse valleys feeding the same rivers. Even today, when modern historians trace Ethiopia's past through evidence and excavation, they still find the heartbeat of these narratives beneath the data. Each discovery seems to confirm something the legends already understood, that identity is not fixed to dates or rulers, but to shared imagination. The myths of Ethiopia were never just explanations of the past. They were promises to the future, reminders of how a people might endure. By the time the great monuments of Aksum began to weather and crumble, the stories remained intact. They travelled with caravans into new cities, whispered in markets, sung by herders under the same stars that had watched over their ancestors. Through them, memory became portable. An empire could fall, yet its voice would keep speaking. Night in the Highlands carries that voice still. When the wind moves through the old ruins, it sounds like murmured conversation, fragments of tales that have outlived their tellers. Somewhere, a storyteller leans toward the fire, eyes bright, describing how wisdom crossed deserts, how two distant realms once met, and how from that meeting, a people learned to see the world as both vast and familiar. In the end, that is what the legends gave Ethiopia. Not certainty, but perspective. They taught that greatness need not come from conquest. It can come from curiosity, from the courage to imagine connection. They taught that a nation's strength lies in its stories, those that explain where it came from and those that remind it who it still might be. And so the myths endure, flowing beneath the centuries like an underground river. They rise wherever the land is quiet enough to listen, whispering that history is not only written in stone, but also spoken in wonder. The highlands wake to the sound of hammers and chanting. Across the valleys, stone is being shaped, terraces are being cut, and the air smells of rain and earth. The kingdom of Aksum is no longer a rising force. It is the rhythm of the land itself. In these centuries of prosperity, Ethiopia stands at the crossroads of continents, drawing light from every direction. Trade, art, and language blend into something distinctly its own. This is the age when Aksum civilization reaches its full bloom. In the royal capital, markets spread across open squares, filled with merchants and their wares. From Arabia come fine glass and incense. From India, cotton and spices. From Rome, gold coins stamped with the faces of distant emperors. The smell of myrrh mixes with the scent of warm bread. Caravans arrive daily, their camels draped in woven cloth, their drivers leading them through narrow gates worn smooth by centuries of passing hooves. Deals are made not only with words, but with gestures and shared trust. The people of Aksum have built an economy of confidence, as much as of goods. The city's architecture mirrors its success. Palaces rise on terraced hills, their walls built from dark volcanic rock cut into precision blocks. Some are faced with limestone that glows pale gold at sunset. The great stelae, monolithic obelisks carved from single stones, stand in neat rows like a silent army. Each marks the memory of a ruler, but together they form a skyline that proclaims continuity rather than conquest. These are not towers of defiance, but of presence, reminders that civilization can speak without words. Life inside the capital flows in ordered cycles. At dawn, farmers from the surrounding valleys enter the city with baskets of grain, honey, and fruit. Officials record their dues in neat columns on clay tablets, measuring weight with scales made of brass. By midday, the streets are crowded with traders and craftsmen. Potteries bake their wares in smoky kilns. Looms beat rhythmically in shaded courtyards. Evenings bring music, flutes, drums, and voices that rise and fall like the hills themselves. Aksum is not merely a place of power, it is a living mosaic of sound, colour, and motion. Language becomes the thread that binds this world together. The script that once marked trade transactions now records laws, songs, and chronicles. Stone inscriptions declare the deeds of kings in a confident, rounded alphabet. These writings capture more than events. They capture tone. The phrasing speaks of balance, of rule tempered by responsibility, of prosperity shared between highland and coast. The act of writing itself becomes a declaration that memory deserves permanence. Beyond the capital, roads stretch outward through mountain passes and valleys. Engineers design them with a precision that still surprises modern observers. Ditches divert rainwater, bridges cross streams, and resting stations provide shade for caravans. These roads do more than carry trade. They carry ideas. Along them move artisans, scribes, and storytellers, each adding their craft to the expanding cultural chorus of Aksum. The kingdom's heart beats between the highlands and the sea. At Adulis, the port that faces the Red Sea, the world comes to visit. Ships anchor in the calm bay, their sails whitening the horizon. From their holds emerge spices, wine, perfumes, and scrolls of papyrus. The marketplace hums in a dozen languages: Greek, Sabaean, Ge'ez, Aramaic, Egyptian. Translators are prized figures here, moving between tongues with ease, weaving a common rhythm out of difference. The city serves not only as a harbour of goods, but as a harbour of knowledge. Aksumite rulers understand that prestige flows as much from reputation as from armies. They cultivate alliances with distant courts, sending embassies up the Nile and across the sea. Travellers from foreign lands write admiringly of Aksum's order and wealth. They describe its roads lined with trees, its markets well governed, its rulers just. To the outside world, the Highland Kingdom seems remote, almost mythic, a land above the clouds that governs itself through patience rather than speed. At home, that patience becomes art. The artisans of Aksum develop a distinctive style: geometric patterns carved into stone lintels, bronze ornaments shaped into spirals, jewellery made from gold and garnet. Their craft reflects the landscape, structured yet fluid, strong yet delicate. Textiles are dyed in deep blues and reds, woven with repeating motifs that echo terraces on mountain slopes. Every object carries the handprint of discipline. Water remains the empire's most precious companion. Engineers dig reservoirs into the earth to store rain through the dry season. They line the walls with stone and clay. learning from observation which soils hold best. Wells dot the countryside, their rims worn smooth by generations drawing water. In a land of extremes, the ability to control water is not only technical, but philosophical. It symbolizes harmony with nature, the balance between taking and preserving. As Aksum's confidence grows, its rulers begin to see themselves as stewards of order. Their inscriptions record more than victory. They describe building projects, irrigation works, and legal reforms. The tone is pragmatic, almost administrative. The rulers present themselves not as conquerors, but as caretakers, responsible for maintaining equilibrium between mountain and sea, between city and countryside. This sense of stewardship becomes the moral language of statecraft for centuries to come. In the countryside, daily life continues with quiet rhythm. Farmers tend fields of barley and teff, watching the horizon for the first signs of rain. Shepherds guide flocks through narrow passes, their songs echoing between cliffs. Market days bring communities together. Gossip and laughter mix with the clink of metal tools and the rustle of grain sacks. Festivals mark the cycles of planting and harvest. Dance and drumlink work to celebration, reminding everyone that survival is also joy. The cultural bloom of Aksum is not only material, it is intellectual. Scholars begin to record observations of the stars, the timing of monsoon winds, the patterns of migration among animals. They debate ethics, governance, and justice. Their discussions are practical, grounded in the needs of a society that must remain self-sufficient yet open to the world. Through dialogue and adaptation, Aksum develops a distinctive philosophy that strength lies in balance and progress in continuity. Over time, the kingdom's influence radiates beyond its borders. Neighboring regions adopt its coinage and language of administration. Pilgrims and envoys carry its customs northward into Nubia and westward along the Nile. The name Aksum becomes shorthand for stability, a word spoken with respect in distant courts. Even as other empires falter, the highland realm endures, protected by geography and discipline. No civilization, however, is untouched by change. The very networks that make Aksum prosperous also expose it to new ideas and challenges. Foreign merchants bring stories of other powers rising across the seas. Shifts in trade routes alter the flow of wealth. The kingdom's leaders, once content to look inward, begin to sense the vastness beyond their borders. Yet they face these changes not with fear, but with curiosity. For centuries, Aksum has thrived by absorbing the unfamiliar and making it its own. The habit of adaptation is now its most defining art. Even as the centuries turn, the city's monuments remain the same. At dusk, the tall stelae cast long shadows across the fields. Birds circle above them. Shepherds rest in their shade. The stones have seen generations rise and fall, yet their message endures. Endurance is a form of elegance. Aksum's greatness lies not in sudden triumphs, but in steady refinement, the way a craftsman polishes a single design over a lifetime. When the night finally comes, the highlands cool and quiet. The stars appear one by one, the same constellations that guided merchants and builders for centuries. From the terraces below, the city glows faintly with the light of cooking fires. A traveller looking down from the ridges might see those scattered points and think of them as another constellation, one shaped not in the sky, but on the earth. This is the image of Aksum at its height, a kingdom balanced between tradition and innovation, mountain and sea, memory and ambition. It is a civilization that speaks softly but lasts loudly, its voice carried through time not by conquest, but by the enduring hum of creation. And even when that voice begins to fade, the silence it leaves behind will be filled with echoes strong enough to guide the centuries that follow. The horizon glows pale as the first light reaches the coast. On the Red Sea, ships drift like shadows, their sails catching the morning wind. From the decks comes the creak of ropes and the smell of wet wood and salt. At the harbour of Adulis, the world converges. Traders step ashore carrying goods from 3 continents, ivory from the African interior, spices from Arabia and India, silks from far to the east. The air hums with languages that overlap like waves. This is Aksum at its height, a kingdom balanced between mountain and sea, where commerce and culture flow in endless rhythm. From the capital high in the highlands to the coast where the desert meets the water, the road is alive with movement. Caravans of camels wind down from the plateaus, their loads wrapped in woven cloth. Along the route, small towns and outposts thrive on the traveller's passage. Inns provide food and shelter, smiths repair tools, herders trade livestock. Every bend in the path feels like a link in an invisible chain connecting the interior of Africa to the farthest ports of the known world. The merchants of Aksum are skilled navigators of both geography and human nature. They know the desert's moods, the timing of the monsoon winds, and the art of negotiation across cultures. They speak in many tongues, but their true fluency lies in the language of exchange. Their ledgers are marked not only with numbers, but with stories, of deals struck beneath acacia trees, of journeys across plains where the horizon never ends. To trade here is to learn patience and precision, to understand that wealth is built one conversation at a time. Adulis itself feels like the beating heart of this system. Warehouses line the harbour, their mud brick walls stacked with sacks of grain and jars of oil. The docks are a forest of masts and ropes, their creaking joined by the calls of seagulls. Fishermen repair nets on the shore while buyers inspect the catch. At midday, the market is a riot of sound, haggling, laughter, the rhythmic tapping of scales. The city is alive with movement, its streets filled with donkeys, porters and travellers from lands whose names the locals pronounce differently every season. From this port, Aksum ships sail far and wide. Their hulls, built from sturdy highland timber, carry goods to the Arabian coast, to Egypt, and to ports beyond the Indian Ocean. Mariners study the stars to plot their routes, steering by constellations familiar to every sailor who has ever crossed these waters. They return months later with cargoes that seem almost mythical. Gemstones, cotton, fine ceramics, carved coral, spices that fill the air with scent long before the cargo holds are opened. The kingdom's wealth flows from these journeys, its prosperity measured not in gold, but in connection. Within Aksum itself, this golden age brings transformation. The city grows outward in circles of stone and light. New quarters rise for craftsmen and traders, their houses built close together along narrow lanes. The sounds of workshops echo through the alleys, metal ringing, cloth beating on looms, the steady rasp of chisels on rock. The stelae field, once reserved for royal monuments, now looks over a city alive with ambition. It is a reminder that even the quietest stone once began as a spark of intention. The prosperity of the empire is not confined to its rulers. Farmers on the outskirts benefit from growing markets for their crops. Herds of cattle and goats move along the highland paths, their bells marking the rhythm of rural life. Small communities along the trade routes specialize in crafts: basket weaving, leatherwork, pottery. Each village contributes to the greater fabric of commerce. The wealth of Aksum lies not in one city, but in the steady hands of thousands of its people. The government's role evolves with this complexity. Officials record tariffs and measure shipments, maintaining fairness among traders. The mint at the capital continues to produce coins in gold, silver and bronze, each stamped with royal insignia and inscriptions in ge'ez. These coins travel farther than the empire's borders, appearing in markets across Arabia and even in the ruins of distant Mediterranean towns. Wherever they are found, they tell the same story: that Aksum is not a frontier, but a centre, a kingdom connected to the pulse of the ancient world. Diplomacy follows trade. Envoys from Aksum travel northward to Egypt and the Levant, bearing gifts and messages. Foreign emissaries arrive in return, climbing the long roads to the Highland court. They bring news of wars and alliances, of new routes opening and old ones closing. The Highland kings listen carefully, aware that understanding the world's shifting patterns is as important as mastering their own terrain. The throne room, simple yet dignified, becomes a place where geography turns into strategy. In these years of prosperity, culture flourishes alongside commerce. Writers and artisans draw inspiration from the world's diversity. Carved reliefs depict ships, caravans, and animals from distant lands. Music absorbs rhythms heard in the ports. Instruments evolve, blending local craftsmanship with imported designs. Painters use new pigments brought from India and Persia, their colours bright as sunrise. The fusion of influences creates an aesthetic unique to the Highlands, structured yet fluid, ancient yet restless for new forms. Education deepens. Scholars study not only scripture and history but mathematics, geometry and navigation. They refine systems of measurement used in trade and construction. Inscriptions become more detailed, recording not just rulers but the engineers and architects who bring their visions to life. In this attention to detail lies Aksum's quiet genius, the belief that every achievement, large or small, deserves to be remembered. Beyond the cities, the highlands themselves seem to reflect the empire's prosperity. Fields stretch in ordered rows, irrigation channels glint in the sun. Terraced hillsides shimmer with grain. Herds graze in the valleys below, their shepherds silhouetted against the sky. From a distance, the land looks cultivated but not tamed, its human patterns fitting naturally into the contours of stone and soil. Centuries of adaptation have turned survival into art. Trade, of course, is never without risk. Bandits haunt the remote passes, storms delay ships, foreign conflicts disrupt familiar routes, yet the system endures because it is flexible. When one road closes, another opens. When one market falters, traders shift to another port. The people of Aksum have learned to read uncertainty as carefully as they read the weather. Adaptation is their invisible infrastructure, as crucial as any road or bridge. The empire's boundaries stretch and contract like the breathing of a living being. New territories are integrated through diplomacy and trade rather than conquest. Governors oversee distant provinces, ensuring that tribute flows steadily to the capital. Local customs are respected, languages coexist. The administration understands that diversity is not a weakness, but a strength. It is this tolerance, more than any army, that holds the empire together. At night, when the bustle of trade subsides, the ports fall quiet. The waves lap against the hulls of anchored ships, and the stars reflect on the water's surface like scattered coins. Sailors rest on deck, their minds drifting between continents. They dream of families waiting in the highlands, of mountain air after months at sea. Somewhere inland, a farmer looks up at the same stars and wonders where his grain is travelling, whose hands will touch it, what stories it will carry with it. The empire's connections are not abstract, they are human threads woven across distance. Aksum's golden age does not announce itself with grandeur, it reveals itself in ordinary perfection. Roads maintained, markets fair, crafts refined, laws obeyed, the simple miracles of civilization. There is no single moment of triumph, no decisive battle, no monument large enough to contain its meaning. Its greatness lies instead in balance, in the quiet interplay of trade and thought, stone and sea, human ambition and patience. Over time, foreign chroniclers take note. In Greek and Roman writings, Aksum is described as one of the four great powers of its age, equal in stature to Persia, Rome, and China. To them, it seems improbable that such a kingdom could exist so far from their own centers of power. Yet traders confirm it. A land of mountains and green fields, of cities built from stone, of rulers who govern with discipline and grace. In their eyes, Aksum becomes a symbol of Africa's sophistication, a reminder that civilization has many homes. Still, every golden age carries the shadow of its limits. The same sea that brings wealth can also carry change. New powers rise along its shores. New routes are discovered that bypass old centers. Climate shifts alter rainfall. The once reliable harvest becomes uncertain. But these challenges lie ahead, unseen for now. For the moment, Aksum glows at its zenith, secure in the belief that it has found harmony with its world. In the final light of day, as the sun sinks over the Red Sea, the water turns the colour of molten bronze. The ships in the harbour look as if they are floating on metal. From the hills above, one can see the outlines of the city, the thin columns of smoke from kitchens, the flicker of torches along the docks. The sounds are distant but distinct. The call of a sailor, the lowing of cattle, the faint ring of hammer on metal. Each noise marks another heartbeat of a civilization in full stride. When darkness falls, the stars replace the sails on the horizon. The merchants sleep beside their goods, dreaming of the journeys still to come. The waves whisper against the stones of the pier. The highlands behind them rest under the same sky, waiting for the caravans that will climb home at dawn. For this one night, and for many nights to come, the empire of Aksum stands complete, a meeting place of worlds, a harmony of sea and soil, a human song carried on the wind. The stelae still stand, tall and silent against the horizon, their shadows stretching over grass and stone. The air is thin and bright, but the city around them has changed. Where once there were markets filled with the hum of trade, there is quiet. The fires that once guided caravans down the mountain roads are few now, and the sea below lies strangely still. The empire of Aksum has entered its long dusk. Decline seldom arrives with thunder. It moves like mist, creeping quietly through years that at first appear ordinary. The signs come slowly, harvests that yield less grain, roads that take longer to repair, ships that fail to return when the winds shift. Then, all at once, the pattern is clear. The rhythm that sustained an empire for centuries begins to falter. The Red Sea, which once carried wealth and connection, starts to betray its partner. Across the water, new powers rise, redirecting trade through different ports. Routes that once led directly to Adolis now turn north or east. Merchants who had filled the markets drift away to more prosperous harbours. The hum of many languages fades. The kingdom that once measured itself by the reach of its trade begins to measure survival instead. Beyond the coasts, the earth itself changes. Rain falls unevenly, rivers dry earlier in the season. Forests retreat, and with them the soil grows thin. The terraces that once gleamed green under the sun turn pale with dust. Farmers adapt as best they can, moving their fields, switching their crops, digging deeper wells. But the rhythm of abundance breaks, and with it the certainty that each season will resemble the last. The people of the Highlands are not strangers to endurance. They have lived through droughts, invasions, and shifting trade winds before. But this time, the challenges arrive together, economic, environmental, and political, intertwining like vines. The weight of centuries begins to bend even the most enduring structures. Roads go unmaintained, bridges crumble. Local lords and governors, once content under royal oversight, start ruling their provinces as their own. Authority frays like old cloth. Still, the culture that Aksum built does not vanish. It withdraws, condenses, and finds refuge in the mountains. The people carry their skills and customs into smaller communities. Stone carving continues, though the monuments are humbler now. Churches and dwellings rather than towers. Farmers still terrace their hillsides. Artisans still weave and forge. The empire's collapse is not an ending, but a transformation. Civilization survives by changing its scale. In the fading of central power, local traditions flourish. In some valleys, leaders emerge who blend old administrative systems with new customs. They mint their own small coins, organize markets, and guard the mountain passes. Elsewhere, isolated settlements form close-knit communities that depend on shared labor. Across the landscape, society becomes quieter, less grand, but more personal. The rhythm of the land reasserts itself over the rhythm of empire. The Highland monasteries grow in influence. Long before, they had been centres of study and record-keeping. Now they become guardians of memory. Scribes continue to copy texts, not out of royal order, but out of devotion to knowledge. They preserve genealogies, songs, and fragments of older chronicles. Through their patient work, the echo of Aksum will reach centuries into the future. When later generations seek to understand their origins, they will find the voices of these scribes waiting for them in careful lines of ink. In the lowlands, new communities appear along rivers and fertile plains. Some are remnants of Aksum's trading colonies. Others are founded by migrants from the highlands looking for new opportunities. These settlements maintain contact with the sea, but on a smaller scale. Trade continues, modest but persistent. The goods are different now, local salt, hides and grain instead of ivory and gold. But the instinct to connect endures. Across the Red Sea, change comes even faster. The coastal world reorganizes under new cultural and political powers. Old alliances fade, replaced by different networks of faith and commerce. Aksum's rulers watch from the mountains, aware that the horizon they once shared has shifted. The sea that made them wealthy now belongs to someone else's story. Yet the highlands, distant and defensible, remain untouched. They withdraw into themselves. preserving what they can of the old ways. To outsiders, it might appear as if the kingdom simply disappears. But within Ethiopia, continuity remains. The language of administration, refined through centuries, continues to be spoken and written. The techniques of agriculture, terracing, irrigation, seed selection remain in use. The art of stone architecture survives, though applied to new purposes. Even as political power disperses, cultural identity endures like a mountain beneath shifting clouds. Archaeologists would later read the evidence of this transformation in the layers of soil. They would find traces of shrinking settlements, of workshops that produced less but remained meticulous, of fortifications built smaller but stronger. The record tells of adaptation rather than collapse. The people of Aksum adjust their ambitions to fit their changing world. In the capital, once the axis of empire, life narrows to the essentials. The royal courts dissolve, leaving behind a landscape of ruins that slowly become part of the countryside. Farmers plant between the fallen stones. Travellers pass through, marvelling at the size of the carved stelae, wondering who had the strength and vision to raise them. The monuments no longer represent power, they represent memory. The people who live among them see in their silence not tragedy, but inheritance. As the population disperses into the highlands, the landscape takes on new significance. Mountains that once protected the empire now shelter its descendants. Valleys once used as trade corridors become sanctuaries. The geography of empire becomes the geography of resilience. Aksum's people turn inward, not in defeat but in reflection. From isolation grows a renewed sense of identity, smaller in scale but deeper in roots. Time continues its quiet erosion. The stones weather, inscriptions fade, roads vanish under grass, yet the old rhythms of life persist. Farmers still follow the rains, herders still trace the same routes their ancestors did. Children still play among the ruins, climbing the bases of fallen pillars as if they were natural hills. In this way, the remnants of empire become part of daily life, their grandeur absorbed into the fabric of the ordinary. Centuries pass in this long twilight. New dynasties rise in neighbouring regions, some claiming connection to the legacy of Aksum, others defining themselves against it. Yet all inherit something of its structure. The habit of organisation, the respect for written record, the belief that governance is a shared duty rather than a privilege. The old kingdom lives on not as a state, but as an idea woven through every new beginning. Travellers who come to the highlands in later ages still sense its presence. They describe ruins overgrown with grass, roads leading nowhere, but also people with a quiet pride in their ancestry. To them, Aksum is not a ruin, but a living ghost, visible in the faces of farmers, in the craftsmanship of builders, in the calm discipline of the land itself. It is a civilization that has turned survival into an art form. In the evenings, as the sun dips behind the mountains, the stelae cast long shadows across the plain. The city is quieter now, but the air still carries the smell of rain and earth, the same scent that filled it centuries ago when caravans climbed the hill. The difference is only in scale. Where there were thousands, there are now hundreds. Where there was empire, there is endurance. The essence remains unchanged. The twilight of Aksum is not a tragedy. It is the slow translation of grandeur into wisdom, of empire into culture. The world around it shifts, new powers, new faiths, new roots, but the highlands keep their rhythm. They hold the memory of centuries like the steady heartbeat of the earth. Even as the lights of empire fade, the glow of continuity remains. And when night finally settles over the ancient city, the stars return to their watch above the tall, patient stones. In their silence lies the promise that no civilization truly disappears. It simply becomes part of the landscape, waiting for the next dawn to reveal it again. The mountains rise like waves frozen in stone. Their cliffs are veiled in mist. Their valleys, deep and green, hum with the sound of water and wind. In these heights, far from the old imperial capitals, a new chapter of civilization takes shape. The name Aksum has faded into history, but its spirit endures, in craft, in memory, and in the quiet ambition of builders who carve the earth itself into monuments. This is the era of Lalibela, the age when faith and architecture merge into one seamless gesture of endurance. The story begins in the heart of the Lasta Highlands, where basalt and tuff form vast plateaus streaked with volcanic ridges. The people who live here have inherited centuries of skill in working stone. Their hands know how to balance precision and patience, how to follow the grain of rock without forcing it. Over generations, they have mastered the art of carving terraces, cisterns, and small shrines. But now they will turn that skill towards something far greater, a city of monuments that will seem less built than revealed. At first glance, the site appears unassuming. It is a stretch of highland plain, cut by narrow gullies where seasonal streams run after rain. But to the eyes of its builders, it holds infinite potential. They do not raise walls upon it, they descend into it. They begin by tracing outlines on the surface, then cutting downward, removing everything that is not needed. Bit by bit, entire structures emerge from single pieces of rock. No bricks, no mortar, no scaffolding, only patience and gravity. Each block that falls reveals another layer of design. As months turn into years, the sound of chisels fills the air. Dust hangs in the sunlight like mist. The workers carve passageways connecting courtyards, tunnels that open suddenly into light. When the first rain falls, the water rushes down these channels, polishing the walls smooth. The site takes on its own logic, part fortress, part sanctuary, part living sculpture. The people of the Highlands watch in awe. From the mountain itself, a new city is being born. What drives such a project? The reasons are many: spiritual, cultural, practical. In a land of rugged terrain and scattered settlements, the mountain offers protection and permanence. Carving into the rock means building against time itself. Erosion may soften the edges, but the structure will never fall. There is also symbolism in this descent. To carve downward is to draw closer to the heart of the world, to root civilization in the same ground that nourishes it. Whatever the beliefs or politics of the age, the builders of Lalibela are united by one principle: endurance through creation. Over time, the complex grows to include more than a dozen structures, each with its own geometry and purpose. The craftsmanship is astonishing. Pillars stand perfectly straight, despite being carved by hand from the same continuous stone as the floor. Windows are shaped in intricate patterns, crosses, circles, and lattice designs that filter light into delicate beams. Some walls are painted with faint traces of colour, earth tones drawn from local minerals. Courtyards are connected by trenches so deep they seem to reach the underworld. Yet the space feels peaceful, not oppressive. a balance between mass and light that only the mountains could teach. Visitors who arrive from distant provinces walk the pathways in silence. They remove their sandals to feel the cool stone beneath their feet. The echo of footsteps in the narrow corridors creates a rhythm that seems ancient, like a heartbeat of the land itself. Birds nest in the crevices high above. When wind sweeps through the channels, it sounds like the low hum of distant voices, a natural music shaped by architecture. In the centuries that follow, the site becomes a center of culture and gathering. Artisans, scribes, and farmers all contribute to its maintenance. Around the carved structures, small villages grow, clusters of huts built from mud and straw, their walls blending into the color of the earth. Pilgrims come and go, carrying stories back to their own regions. For them, the mountain city becomes a symbol not of conquest or wealth, but of devotion to craft and continuity. To stand before its walls is to feel time slow down. The construction of Lalibela is also a reflection of knowledge passed down through generations. The techniques of quarrying and carving recall earlier highland monuments, while the city's organization hints at influences from other ancient centers. The builders draw from a shared memory of stone, accumulated since the days of Aksum. Every cut of the chisel carries echoes of those who shaped the stelae centuries earlier. The lineage of skill is unbroken, even if the empire that fostered it has long since disappeared. Life around the site flows with the seasons. In the rainy months, the valleys turn green and mist gathers over the cliffs. Streams carve new paths through the soil, and farmers plant teff in the terraces nearby. During the dry months, the air is crisp and still. Dust settles on the rocks, giving them the colour of old bronze. The people adapt to this rhythm easily. Their lives are bound to the mountain as surely as the city itself. Every festival, every market, every story takes its setting from the same enduring backdrop of stone and sky. What makes this era remarkable is not only the scale of construction, but the mindset it reveals. The builders of Lalibela work without haste. They measure time in generations rather than years. A project that might take a lifetime to complete is seen not as burden, but as inheritance. Parents teach their children the same techniques, ensuring that the chisel never stops. This continuity of labour mirrors the continuity of belief in human creativity as an act of preservation. To carve is to remember. Beyond Lalibela, the wider highlands experience a period of stability and growth. Trade routes reopen between regions, linking the interior with the coast once more. Caravans move through the valleys carrying salt, honey, textiles, and metals. Small towns rise along these paths, each with its own markets and workshops. The art of weaving flourishes, producing bright fabrics dyed from roots and minerals. Pottery, metalwork, and wood carving reach new refinement. Though the great empire of Aksum has passed, its descendants continue to innovate, each generation adding its own layer to the long story of the highlands. Governance evolves to match this environment. Power is decentralized, shared among local rulers who manage their territories with relative independence. Their authority depends less on conquest and more on cooperation, alliances of trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. The absence of a single imperial capital allows creativity to flourish in many places at once. The highlands become a network of small but vibrant centres of art and learning, linked by common traditions and shared landscapes. In this period, the highlands also strengthen their sense of identity. Isolated by geography yet connected through trade, the people develop a deep attachment to their land. The mountains are not obstacles, they are companions. Every ridge and valley carries stories, names, and memories. The geography itself becomes a kind of collective history, unchanging, reliable, and vast. When outsiders describe Ethiopia in later centuries, they will always mention this fusion of people and place, a union that began here, among the mountain builders. Time smoothed the edges of the carvings, but does not diminish their presence. Centuries after their completion, the structures of Lalibela remain whole, their walls cool to the touch, their courtyards open to the sky. Rain still runs through the channels as it did when the chisels first struck stone. Generations of craftsmen have come and gone, yet the city stands as if newly revealed each morning. Visitors who descend into its depths often describe a feeling difficult to name, something between awe and peace, as if they have stepped into the slow heartbeat of history. Lalibela represents more than architecture. It embodies a worldview. It shows that permanence can be achieved not by imposing on the landscape, but by cooperating with it. Its builders understood the mountain's patience and matched it with their own. They transformed solid rock into spaces of shelter and reflection without ever disturbing the balance of nature around them. Their work is an act of listening, a dialogue between human intention and geological time. When night falls over the Lasta Highlands, the stars crowd close. The carved courtyards glow faintly in the starlight, their outlines barely visible from above. From a distance, one might mistake them for natural formations, as if the earth itself had chosen this shape. That illusion is the ultimate achievement of the mountain builders, to create something so perfectly harmonized with its environment that it seems inevitable, as if it had always been there. In the stillness of those nights, the legacy of Aksum feels alive again, not in the roar of empire, but in the whisper of stone against chisel. The people of the Highlands have learned the oldest lesson of civilization, that to last, one must build not in opposition to the world, but in rhythm with it. And so the city carved from the mountain continues to endure, its silent walls holding the memory of countless hands that shaped them and the endless patience of the land that allowed it. The wind over the Ethiopian plateau carries both memory and change. The centuries of quiet that followed the mountain builders begin to stir. Small kingdoms have grown strong in their valleys. Local lords have learned to govern and to trade. Across the ridges, signals of fire and drum connect scattered territories. It is a land ready for renewal. From the highlands of Shewa and Amhara, new voices rise, leaders who dream of uniting the divided regions under a single rule. The Age of Renewal, of dynasties restored, begins. By the 13th century, the highlands have become a tapestry of alliances. Every valley has its chief, every mountain its small court. The balance among them is fragile, held together by marriages, treaties, and the shared rhythm of trade. Roads wind like threads through the landscape, carrying salt from the deserts, grain from the plains, and iron from the mountains. Messengers move constantly, their horses kicking dust into the blue air. In the markets, farmers and merchants speak of peace, for peace means the road remains open. But peace in such times is always temporary. Ambition travels as quickly as trade. Among the many regional leaders, one begins to stand apart, not for his wealth, but for his vision. His name is Yekuno Amlak, a prince from the Central Highlands. Raised among monasteries and villages, he has seen both the hardship of isolation and the promise of unity. He believes that the scattered territories of the Highlands share a single inheritance, a shared sense of destiny rooted in history and story. If the people can be gathered under one rule again, he thinks, Ethiopia can reclaim its balance and its voice. The young ruler builds his strength carefully. He studies alliances, earning loyalty not only with arms but with patience. He moves between valleys, visiting markets and temples, speaking with farmers as readily as with nobles. His words carry conviction, his actions restraint. Slowly, the smaller kings begin to align with him, sensing both his ambition and his sincerity. He promises not domination, but continuity, a renewal of order after centuries of fragmentation. Conflict comes, as it always must when power shifts. Yet it is brief and contained. The old rulers of the north, descendants of the mountain builders, yield with dignity. Their traditions are preserved, their lands remain intact. The change feels less like conquest and more like evolution. A single crown does not erase the many, it connects them. The Highlands, long divided by geography, begin to see themselves once again as part of a whole. Yekuno Amlak takes his throne with ceremony but little spectacle. He chooses to rule not from grand palaces, but from fortified hill towns, close to the land and the people. His court is mobile, moving with the seasons, keeping contact with distant provinces. Scribes record his decrees on parchment. Administrators oversee roads, taxes, and irrigation. The language of governance, refined in earlier centuries, returns to common use. A new chapter begins, one grounded in both heritage and reform. In the years that follow, trade reawakens. Caravans climb once more through the passes to the coast. Merchants from Arabia and the Horn bring textiles, glass, and spices. Highland markets fill with noise and colour. Farmers expand their terraces. Smiths repair old forges. The roads, neglected since the fall of Aksum, are rebuilt stone by stone. Travellers describe a kingdom in motion, neither static nor chaotic, but alive with purpose. The renewed dynasty invests not only in power, but in culture. Schools of writing and painting flourish in the monasteries. Artisans refine the craft of illumination, decorating manuscripts with borders of green and gold. Poets compose verses that celebrate the land rather than war, songs of harvest, rain, and endurance. Music develops in complexity, its rhythms echoing the movement of the mountains themselves. A distinct Highland aesthetic emerges, disciplined, graceful, and grounded in harmony. At the same time, diplomacy becomes a key art. The new kings understand that Ethiopia's strength lies as much in its reputation as in its armies. Envoys are sent to neighbouring kingdoms. Correspondence crosses seas and deserts. Foreign travellers who visit the court are struck by its confidence. They describe a kingdom aware of its age and sure of its direction, a state that measures time in centuries rather than years. In their writings, Ethiopia is no longer an isolated remnant of Aksum, but a renewed power, resilient and self-assured. Beyond politics, this period marks the maturing of a distinctive Highland society. The architecture of fortresses and churches takes on new proportions, blending practicality with grace. Builders use local stone but add carved detail, arches, doorways, and geometric motifs that mirror the patterns of weaving and painting. The structures are solid yet elegant, enduring yet inviting. Every doorway feels like an entrance to both shelter and story. Agriculture expands into previously untended valleys. Systems of shared labour develop. Neighbours join together to clear fields, build terraces, and channel water. The highland soil, though thin, yields richly when treated with care. The people's relationship with the land deepens. Farming becomes not just sustenance but tradition. The rhythms of planting and harvest set the calendar, and festivals mark each season's turning. In the fields, one can still hear songs whose melodies trace back to this age of renewal. For the rulers, legitimacy rests on stewardship. They see themselves as caretakers of continuity rather than founders of novelty. The chronicles of the time describe kings who visit their provinces, listen to grievances, and settle disputes under trees rather than thrones. Governance is personal, its authority tied to presence. The kings are not distant figures, but visible participants in daily life. Through this intimacy, stability grows. The centuries following Yakuno Amlak's reign witness cycles of growth and pause, strength and fragility. Dynasties rise and fall, yet the idea of unity remains. Each new ruler inherits not only the throne, but the responsibility to maintain the delicate equilibrium of the highlands, between regions, between peoples, between past and future. Unlike the empires of conquest elsewhere, Ethiopia's continuity depends less on expansion than on adaptation. It learns to bend without breaking, to retreat without surrendering its essence. During this era, artistic expression becomes a mirror of resilience. Metalworkers craft intricate crosses and filigree jewellery, objects of both beauty and technical mastery. Painters fill walls and manuscripts with vibrant depictions of human life, nature, and symbol. Their imagery blends observation with imagination, realism with geometry. The style is unmistakably Ethiopian, precise, luminous, and contemplative. These works, preserved in hidden monasteries and mountain villages, will later astonish the world with their sophistication and continuity. Trade continues to sustain the economy, though on a smaller and more stable scale than in Aksum's time. The routes to the Red Sea remain vital, but new inland markets arise. Gold from the south, salt from the north, and textiles from the east move through the kingdom. The merchant class gains influence, forming bridges between rural and urban life. The circulation of goods mirrors the flow of ideas, keeping the country connected despite its rugged geography. The return of centralized rule also brings renewed confidence in record keeping. Chronicles begin to describe events in ordered years rather than distant legends. The language of administration grows formal. Documents are archived with care. For the first time in centuries, Ethiopia's history begins to align with the measured calendars of neighbouring regions. Yet the tone remains uniquely its own, practical, patient, and steeped in landscape. The land, as always, is the silent witness to everything. The mountains remain the same. The rivers carve the same paths through stone. Yet in the renewed hum of villages and the repaired roads winding through the passes, one can feel the pulse of revival. The same energy that once built Aksum and carved Lalibela has found a new shape, quieter but enduring. In the evenings, the new kings stand on the terraces of their hilltop forts and look west, where the sun bleeds into the valleys. They see smoke rising from villages, hear the faint sound of drums, and understand the weight of what they have rebuilt. Their reigns may be brief, but the continuity they protect will outlive them. Ethiopia's strength, they know, is not in its momentary glory, but in its ability to keep going, to fall silent and rise again. always shaped by the same resilient land. As darkness settles, the torches of the forts flicker like stars. Below, the countryside rests under the vast sky, the wind carrying the smell of soil and wood smoke. The people sleep, knowing that the roads are open, the markets safe, and the harvest near. In the deep calm of the night, the sound of the mountains returns, a quiet reminder that dynasties may change, but the land remembers. The renewal is complete, not because the world has been remade, but because the rhythm of endurance continues unbroken. The wind off the Red Sea tastes of salt and dust. It drifts inland across the plains, curling around the cliffs and valleys of the Ethiopian Highlands. Along this frontier between mountain and coast, the world is always in motion. Traders, farmers, herders, and sailors meet where dry land meets water. Cultures mingle, not in sudden bursts, but in the slow rhythm of exchange. The story of Ethiopia during these centuries is a story of contact, of highlands learning from the sea, and the sea learning from the mountains. From the ports on the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, ships come and go with the regular pulse of the monsoon winds. The sails of dhows and merchant vessels dot the horizon, their movements guided by stars older than memory. They carry the wealth of many worlds, spices from India, glassware from Arabia, beads and silks from far across the ocean. When these ships reach the coast of the Horn of Africa, the goods are unloaded and weighed, then loaded again onto camels for the long journey inland. The caravans that climb toward the highlands travel slowly, winding through desert valleys and dry scrub. They pass wells ringed with stone, where herders and merchants gather to rest. Water is life here, and every stop is a place of negotiation, for trade, for alliance, for peace. At night, fires burn along the caravan routes, their smoke rising like beacons. The stars overhead map the path home, the same constellations followed by generations before them. When the caravans reach the highlands, the air cools and the world turns green again. The markets of the upland towns bustle with voices. Salt from the lowlands meets gold and grain from the interior. Foreign merchants haggle beside local farmers. Children chase each other between stalls stacked with pottery and woven cloth. The smell of roasted grain mingles with that of frankincense and spice. It is not just goods that change hands, but stories, descriptions of distant cities, tales of invention, fragments of music and language. Each encounter leaves a trace. The highlands and the coast could not be more different in landscape or climate, yet they depend on each other completely. The coast feeds on the highlands' harvest. The highlands depend on the coast for access to the wider world. Between them stretches a belt of frontier regions where communities of traders and pastoralists make their homes. They move freely between languages and customs, living by adaptability. In these spaces, identity is fluid, built on cooperation rather than borders. Over time, coastal towns such as Zela and Darlak grow into small kingdoms of trade. Their wealth comes not from the sword, but from negotiation. They are ports where everything and everyone passes through. To their harbours come ships from Arabia, India, and occasionally from the far Mediterranean. Their streets echo with the voices of sailors and merchants. Their markets glow with goods from 3 continents. They are cosmopolitan in the truest sense, not ruled by one faith or ethnicity, but by the logic of exchange. The highlands, meanwhile, remain stable, anchored by their long traditions of governance and culture. Their rulers watch the growth of the coastal cities with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They see opportunity in trade but also risk in dependence. Their policies are pragmatic, maintain open routes, encourage exchange, but protect the integrity of the interior. Caravans bring wealth, but they also carry new ideas, new customs, and the potential for conflict. The challenge for the kings of the Highlands is to balance openness with preservation, to let the world in without being swallowed by it. For centuries, this balance holds. The Red Sea becomes less a barrier than a bridge, linking Ethiopia to the broader networks of the Indian Ocean world. Across its waters flow not just goods, but skills. Artisans bring techniques in metalwork and architecture. Scholars carry books and instruments. Mariners teach the reading of stars and winds. In return, Ethiopia shares its own exports: ivory, gold, hides, and the highland grain that sustains distant ports. Each side gives and receives, adjusting to the rhythm of the other. Inland, cities grow along the caravan routes. Some begin as rest stops and end as thriving markets. Around them rise small fortresses, monasteries, and clusters of houses. The architecture blends influences from many sources: square highland towers, domed roofs from the coast, courtyards shaded by acacia and olive. The result is neither purely local nor foreign, but something new, a visual record of coexistence. A traveller moving through these towns might hear a dozen languages in a single afternoon. It is a world where difference is normal. Along with trade comes diplomacy, rulers of highland and coast exchange gifts, textiles, gold, books, animals. Marriage alliances knit together families across regions. Envoys carry letters sealed in wax, requesting safe passage or the renewal of trade agreements. When disputes arise over tariffs, water, or pasture, negotiation is preferred to war. The routes are too valuable to risk closing. Commerce becomes a kind of peacekeeping, and prosperity its reward. Still, the frontier is not without tension. Periods of drought or shifting trade can upset the balance. Rival factions vie for control of profitable towns. When one region prospers too quickly, another grows wary. Yet these disruptions seldom last. The shared dependence between highlands and coast pulls the system back into harmony. In the long view of history, cooperation proves stronger than rivalry. Culturally, the contact between the interior and the coast leaves a lasting imprint. The art of navigation and geometry enriches highland scholarship. Words from foreign tongues enter local languages, their pronunciations softened by mountain air. Music gains new rhythms from drums and string instruments brought from abroad. Potters experiment with imported glazes. The result is a quiet but steady fusion of influences, a blending that expands imagination rather than erasing identity. For travellers from distant lands, Ethiopia in this age seems a paradox. It is both isolated and connected, ancient yet adaptive. Its mountains appear unchanging, yet its ports are alive with novelty. Chroniclers who visit its courts note the order and confidence of its administration, the self-sufficiency of its farms, the dignity of its people. They see a kingdom that faces the outside world not with fear, but with measured curiosity. A civilization confident enough in its past to engage with the future on its own terms. The exchange between highland and coast also shapes the landscape itself. Roads widen, bridges strengthen. Markets move closer to caravan routes. Wells are deepened, and small fortifications guard key passes. Infrastructure becomes both a necessity and a symbol, proof that even in rough terrain, cooperation can carve permanence. The trails worn by merchants become arteries of civilization, connecting cultures that otherwise might never meet. In this interconnected world, faiths and traditions coexist with surprising ease. In one town, a traveller might see a shrine built beside a church. In another, hear different prayers rising from neighbouring courtyards. The people have learned that diversity is part of trade, and trade is part of survival. Tolerance is not ideology, but practicality, a habit shaped by the daily reality of shared roads and markets. Over generations, it becomes part of the Highland character, an instinct for balance, for coexistence within difference. The centuries pass with this rhythm of give and take, ebb and flow. At times, external forces test the equilibrium. New powers to the north, new sea routes opening elsewhere. Yet Ethiopia endures, protected by its geography and by the wisdom of its traditions. The mountains remain a sanctuary of continuity, the coasts a threshold to the world. Between them stretches a frontier not of conflict, but of conversation. At dusk, the Red Sea glows copper under the sinking sun. From the cliffs above, one can see the line where the water meets the desert, and beyond that, the faint blue of the mountains. The same winds that once carried the ships of Aksum now ripple through the sails of new traders. The same stars guide their navigation. The forms of commerce may change, the ports may rise and fall, but the rhythm endures. The endless dialogue between the highlands and the sea. In the stillness of night, when the waves fall silent and the wind settles over the valleys, the land seems to breathe in unison. Mountains and coast, earth and water, each sustaining the other. The empire has long since transformed, yet its heartbeat remains steady. The frontier is no border, it is a meeting place, a reminder that civilizations grow not in isolation, but at the edges where worlds touch. The highlands of Ethiopia never truly sleep. Even when the valleys grow quiet and the hills darken under the moon, a faint hum lingers, the whisper of generations shaping their world. By the 19th century, that hum has become a restless pulse. The old networks of trade and tradition still hold, but they are strained by distance and divided rule. Across the mountains, countless local rulers, noble families, and small armies watch one another with caution. Each province lives by its own rhythm. The land is strong, but its unity has thinned. For nearly 2 centuries, Ethiopia has been in what later generations will call the era of princes, a time of shifting alliances and fragile balance. No single power controls the whole. Every valley has its own laws, every hilltop fortress its own ambitions. Yet beneath this fragmentation lies something constant, a shared memory of order, of a land once joined. In the quiet corners of monasteries and market squares, people still speak of the old kings who united the highlands, of peace that once stretched from river to sea. The dream of renewal endures, waiting for a voice bold enough to summon it. That voice appears in the mid-1800s, rising from the rugged northern province of Kwara. His name is Kassa Hailu. The stories told about his youth vary. Some call him a bandit, others a soldier, still others a shepherd who could not bear injustice. What all agree upon is his intensity. He speaks little, acts quickly, and carries himself with a confidence that draws followers. In a land tired of chaos, his certainty feels like direction. At first, Kassa leads a small band, fighting regional lords who tax the peasants beyond endurance. He wins battles not through numbers, but through speed and cunning. Word spreads across the highlands of a commander who defeats larger armies, then shares the captured grain among villages. To some, he is a liberator. To others, a threat. But to everyone, he is unmistakably a force of change. As his influence grows, Kassa begins to imagine something greater than survival. He sees the scattered lands of Ethiopia as limbs of the same body, cut off from one another by fear and ambition. He believes that only a single authority can heal them. Unity, to him, is not a matter of pride, but of preservation. Without it, the highlands will be swallowed by the shifting politics of the outside world. With it, they might stand independent in an era when empires beyond the horizon are expanding into Africa. By the early 1850s, Kassa's campaigns have reshaped the map. Province by province, rival lords either join him or fall before him. The roads between the northern and central highlands open once more. In 1855, he is crowned in Gondar, the old imperial capital, under the name Tewodros II. His coronation feels less like the start of a reign than the closing of a long circle, a return to unity after centuries of division. Tewodros is unlike any ruler before him. He is both visionary and volatile, filled with conviction yet haunted by doubt. He dreams of a modern Ethiopia, strong, disciplined, and respected. He orders the repair of roads and the forging of new weapons. He gathers blacksmiths, artisans, and scholars to his court, urging them to learn from foreign techniques while keeping their own skill intact. He speaks of building a self-sufficient kingdom, one that can stand equal to any nation on earth. His ambitions reach beyond the battlefield. He calls for education, for the training of young men in engineering and administration. He imagines schools that teach languages and science alongside the traditional studies of law and literature. A country, he says, is strong only when its people can read and build. To the peasants who bring tribute to his court, he promises fairness. To his soldiers, discipline and purpose. For a moment, it seems that the long dream of unity has returned in flesh and will. But vision, when paired with impatience, can become a storm. The same passion that drives Tewodros to reform also makes him restless with resistance. His authority challenges centuries of local independence, and the nobles who once followed him begin to resist. The empire he is trying to rebuild has forgotten how to move as one. Each decree he issues meets hesitation. Each call for loyalty meets calculation. To the people, his intensity sometimes feels like fire, necessary but consuming. Tewodros tries to impose order through discipline. Taxes are standardized, armies are centralized. Those who oppose him face swift punishment. His justice, though often fair in principle, grows harsh in practice. The same villagers that once cheered him begin to fear his soldiers. Yet even as his rule tightens, his sense of purpose does not waver. He continues to build, to dream, to push for the transformation of Ethiopia into a single, modern state. He constructs a great fortress on the mountain of Magdala, a citadel meant to symbolize both defense and destiny. From its heights, one can see miles of rugged terrain, the same landscape that has tested and protected Ethiopia for ages. Within its walls, Tewodros builds workshops, foundries, and an armory. Blacksmiths forge tools and weapons under his supervision. Carpenters craft gun carriages from highland timber. He commissions the making of a massive cannon, hoping to prove that Ethiopia can master the technologies that have reshaped the wider world. For a time, Magdala becomes a symbol of renewal, the Highlands reborn through craftsmanship and determination. Yet the burden of unity grows heavier. Relations with foreign powers, which he had hoped would bring knowledge and respect, begin to sour. Letters are exchanged but not answered, promises made but not kept. Misunderstandings pile upon pride. The emperor's patience, already strained by domestic resistance, frays further. By the mid-1860s, his reforms slow under the weight of isolation. Rebellions flare in distant provinces. Diplomacy falters. The dream that once seemed within reach begins to blur. The fortress of Magdala, built as a beacon, turns into a refuge. Even here, surrounded by the machinery of his own making, Tewodros feels the distance between vision and reality. He is a man ahead of his time, trapped by the limits of it. In 1868, his story reaches its tragic conclusion. A foreign expedition marches inland, sent to rescue captives taken during his disputes with outside powers. Their numbers are overwhelming, their weapons far beyond anything Ethiopia possesses. When their columns approach Magdala, Tewodros watches from the cliffs above. He understands that defeat is inevitable, but surrender feels unthinkable. He gathers his closest followers and speaks quietly of destiny, of the need to leave his people not humiliation, but memory. That night, he ends his own life, choosing to die on his mountain rather than be taken from it. The guns fall silent and the invaders withdraw. In their wake, the fortress stands empty but unbroken. The people of the Highlands mourn their ruler with complicated hearts, sorrow for his death, relief at the end of fear, admiration for his courage. Over time, his name will grow into legend, a king who dreamed too fiercely, who tried to forge modernity from tradition, and whose fire lit the path for those who would follow. In the years after Tewodros, the Highlands settle once more into cautious balance. But his vision, though unfinished, leaves a mark. The idea of a unified, self-reliant Ethiopia cannot be forgotten. The roads he reopened, the workshops he built, the seeds of education he planted, all will be remembered by those who come after. His reign becomes a bridge between the old world and the modern one, between the memory of empire and the promise of a nation. At dusk, the mountain of Magdala glows in the last light of the sun. The wind moves softly through the grass, carrying the faint echo of hammers long silent. Below, villages cling to the slopes, their fires flickering in the twilight. The land is peaceful again, but its calm feels earned, not given. The age of fire has passed, leaving behind the warmth of rebirth, the sense that Ethiopia, though scarred, will rise again. When the night finally deepens, the stars spread across the sky like embers cooling after a forge. They reflect on the stones of the mountain and on the faces of those who remember. For them, Tewodros is not just a ruler, but a symbol. Proof that even in fragmentation, unity can be imagined. That even in failure, renewal can begin. The Highlands awaken to a new century. The air is crisp, and the sun climbs slowly over the plateaus, touching villages, rivers, and newly built roads. The memory of Tewodros still lingers, his dream of unity, his determination to lift Ethiopia toward modern strength. But the land has learned that unity must be tempered with patience. Out of this quiet determination emerges a new leader, one whose skill is less fire than steady light. His name is Menelik. Born in the central region of Shewa, Menelik grows up in a time of rebuilding. The scars of the old wars remain, but so do the lessons. He understands that strength cannot come from force alone. Where Tewodros sought to forge a nation through will, Menelik will shape it through connection, roads, trade, diplomacy, and understanding. His rise marks not another rebellion, but an evolution. The Highlands are ready once more for a hand that can bind them together. As a young ruler, Menelik travels constantly. He rides across plains and mountains, through villages and markets, listening to his people. He studies geography the way others study books. He learns where the rivers flood, where the grain grows best, and which valleys hold iron and salt. To him, knowledge of the land is the foundation of leadership. He is also a keen observer of the world beyond Ethiopia's borders. Through travelers, merchants, and envoys, he begins to grasp the scale of change underway across the globe. New empires rise overseas. Railways and telegraphs shrink distance. The age of isolation is ending, and Menelik knows his country must step forward or risk being overtaken by history. His first task is consolidation. The Highlands remain a patchwork of provinces, each ruled by its own noble families. Menelik moves carefully, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through limited conflict, but always with an eye toward unification. Over years of steady effort, he succeeds in bringing the central regions under one crown. Yet his approach is less conquest than partnership. Local leaders retain their dignity, their traditions respected. It is this balance between authority and inclusion that becomes Menelik's quiet genius. The nation begins to breathe as one. Once unity is secured, attention turns outward. The capital shifts from the old centers of the north to a new city in the heart of Shewa, Addis Ababa, New Flower. What begins as a modest settlement on a fertile plateau soon grows into a thriving hub. Roads radiate from it like spokes on a wheel. Caravans bring grain, salt, and textiles. Returning merchants carry news from the coasts. The city hums with activity. Markets, stables, workshops, and administrative halls, all expanding in rhythm. The sound of hammers and hoofbeats blends into the pulse of a rising capital. Menelik is fascinated by technology. He welcomes foreign advisors, not as masters, but as teachers. Engineers assist in constructing bridges and introducing modern weaponry. Telegraph wires stretch across valleys, carrying messages that once took days to deliver. For the first time, Ethiopia begins to feel connected, not just by faith and history, but by physical lines of communication. Roads link the provinces, uniting mountain villages with the growing capital. What was once myth, a single Ethiopia, now becomes geography. His policies are practical. Trade expands through diplomacy rather than aggression. Agreements with neighboring regions ensure open routes for commerce. Menelik establishes minting systems for coinage and standardizes measures of weight and currency. He encourages cultivation of cash crops alongside traditional grains, ensuring that the economy is both modern and resilient. Taxes are restructured to fund public works, roads, wells, schools. Under his steady rule, the kingdom begins to resemble the framework of a modern state. Yet Menelik's greatest challenge and greatest test comes not from within, but from beyond his borders. Across Africa, foreign powers have begun carving empires, dividing territories by pen and treaty. Lines are drawn on maps thousands of miles away from the lands they describe. To the west and north, new colonies appear under distant flags. To the east, along the Red Sea, foreign outposts edge closer to Ethiopia's frontiers. Menelik sees clearly what these movements mean. The age of expansion has reached his doorstep. He responds not with panic, but with calculation. Diplomacy becomes his weapon. He corresponds with European powers in their own languages, studying their intentions through each proposal and treaty. He signs agreements when they serve Ethiopia's interests, and delays or counters them when they do not. His patience frustrates foreign negotiators who mistake it for indecision. But Menelik is not uncertain. He is waiting for the moment when Ethiopia can speak from a position of strength. That moment comes in the 1890s, when misunderstanding over borders grows into confrontation. A treaty signed years earlier is interpreted differently by two sides. One clause, translated in separate ways, becomes the spark for conflict. To the foreign empire seeking dominance, Ethiopia is just another space to occupy. To Menelik, it is the sum of centuries, a land that has endured too much to yield now. When diplomacy fails, he prepares for war. The mobilization that follows is extraordinary. From every corner of the highlands, men gather, farmers, shepherds, soldiers of the local nobility. They bring their rifles, their swords, their determination. Supply lines are organized, messengers dispatched. Women carry grain and water to the front. The unity that Menelik has built, once administrative and cultural, now becomes tangible. The nation moves as one. The battle that results, fought on the slopes near the town of Adwa in 1896, will echo far beyond Ethiopia's mountains. It lasts only a single day, but its meaning endures for centuries. Against a modern European army, Ethiopia holds its ground and triumphs. The victory shocks the colonial powers of the world. It is not merely a military success, it is a declaration that the continent of Africa is not for the taking, that sovereignty and dignity are not relics of the past. For Ethiopians, the victory affirms what their history has always whispered, that endurance is a strength equal to empire. After Adwa, Menelik's standing rises internationally. Foreign governments now approach him with respect. Ethiopia is recognized as an independent kingdom with defined borders and a sovereign ruler. The world's maps are redrawn, and for the first time, one African nation remains uncolored by foreign rule. The psychological impact is immense, not only for Ethiopians, but for millions across the continent. The victory becomes a symbol of what is possible when unity and determination meet wisdom. In the years that follow, Menelik continues to modernize his realm. Railways are planned to connect the capital with the coast. Schools open in growing towns. New administrative systems bring consistency to governance. Foreign artisans and technicians are invited to train local apprentices. The rhythm of change accelerates, but it never loses its grounding in tradition. Menelik insists that progress must serve the people, not replace them. His vision is not imitation, but adaptation, modern tools for an ancient land. He governs until age and illness slow him, but his influence endures. The Ethiopia he leaves behind is stronger, more connected, and more self-aware than at any time since the days of Aksum. The foundations he lays, unity, infrastructure, and national confidence, will carry the country through the turbulent century ahead. The roads he built will later bear the weight of armies, diplomats, and generations of travelers who continue his work of linking mountain to sea. When Menelik dies in 1913, the people mourn not only a ruler, but an idea, the belief that their land could stand equal with any nation on earth. His legacy is visible in every corner of the country, in the railway stretching across the plains, in the schools where children read by lamplight, in the steady rhythm of markets that pulse with local and global trade. He does not leave behind vast monuments, but something greater, a functioning nation that blends modern ambition with the quiet strength of its history. In the evenings after his passing, the lights of Addis Ababa glow faintly beneath the stars. The roads leading outward shimmer like threads of silver, connecting mountains, rivers, and valleys. The air carries the scent of eucalyptus and rain. Somewhere, a train whistle echoes in the distance, a sound that did not exist in Ethiopia a generation before. It is the sound of movement, of a nation traveling its own path into the modern world. Menelik's empire is not an empire of conquest, but of connection. It marks the moment when ancient continuity meets the modern horizon, when the wisdom of centuries takes its first confident steps into the age of progress. The world has changed, and Ethiopia has changed with it, but on its own terms, along roads that still lead from the highlands toward the dawn. The morning light of Adwa falls on a landscape of hills and folded valleys, each ridge washed in the pale gold of dawn. The air is thin and sharp, carrying the low murmur of thousands of voices preparing for the day. Men polish rifles, check powder, and tie amulets around their wrists. Women move among them, distributing food, filling water skins, adjusting bandages. Horses stamp the ground. The sound of drums begins to roll across the slopes, not the rhythm of ceremony, but of readiness. It is March 1896, and Ethiopia stands at a crossroads. For months, tension between the empire and a European power has grown. What began as a dispute over the meaning of a treaty has turned into an existential question. Who decides the fate of a sovereign nation? Across Africa, foreign powers are drawing lines on maps, claiming territories as though they were uninhabited land. But here, in these mountains, that pattern will meet its resistance. Emperor Menelik II has spent the past year preparing. He knows the stakes extend beyond his borders, that this battle will not only decide the security of his kingdom, but also the idea that an African state can stand equal among nations. His response is methodical. Messengers on horseback carry orders through valleys and plains, summoning every province to the cause. From north and south, east and west, warriors gather. Some march for weeks, carrying rifles inherited from earlier wars. Others bring spears and shields carved from hide. Their numbers swell into the tens of thousands, drawn from nearly every corner of the country. They arrive not for conquest, but for defense, a defense of identity, of history, of the right to remain their own. By the time Menelik's forces reach Adwa, the valleys are filled with tents and campfires. The highlands echo with the sound of human movement on a scale unseen for generations. The emperor moves among his soldiers with calm authority, speaking in measured tones. He reminds them that the land they defend is not his alone, but theirs. The mountains that raised them, the rivers that fed them, the villages where their children wait. His words are simple. This is our home. We will not give it away. Opposite him, the invading army marches from the north, modern and disciplined, its ranks equipped with steel and artillery. Their commanders expect a swift victory. They imagine the highlands as barren and disorganized, their people too divided to resist. But the ground beneath them belongs to those who know its contours. Every ridge, every path, every hidden gully is familiar to the Ethiopians who have grown up here. The terrain itself seems to side with them, its ridges concealing their movement, its valleys amplifying their numbers. At dawn on the 1st of March, battle begins. The first shots echo through the hills like cracks of thunder. Smoke drifts upward, blurring the horizon. Across the slopes, small units of Ethiopian fighters move swiftly, appearing and disappearing with the terrain. They attack from ridges, from behind rocks, from gullies hidden in shadow. Their coordination surprises the invaders, who struggle to form ranks on the uneven ground. The hills that looked so still at sunrise now roar with gunfire and shouting. As the day unfolds, the scale of the engagement becomes clear. Menelik's forces fight not as a single mass, but as a network, disciplined yet flexible, united by understanding rather than strict command. Each contingent is led by its own general, loyal to the emperor, but free to act according to the flow of battle. Communication is carried by runners and horn signals. What seems to outsiders like chaos is in fact a choreography shaped by terrain and tradition. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher, heat rising from the stones. Ammunition grows scarce, water runs low. Yet the resolve of the Highlanders does not break. Their endurance is not born of training, but of generations living with hardship. A resilience that has become instinct. Every time a ridge seems lost, another wave of fighters appears from behind it. The invaders, though better armed, find themselves surrounded and disoriented, their lines tangled in the valleys. By midday, the outcome begins to turn. Menelik's cavalry charges down from the heights, cutting through the weakened flank of the foreign force. The sound of gunfire fades into the crash of hoofbeats and the clash of steel. In the confusion, flags fall, orders dissolve. The invaders retreat, then scatter. When evening comes, the field of Adwa belongs to Ethiopia. The victory is total, not merely in numbers, but in meaning. News of it spreads faster than any messenger could travel. In every corner of Ethiopia, from the Red Sea coast to the far southern plains, celebrations erupt. Bells ring in churches and villages, markets fill with song. For the first time in generations, the people feel the tangible weight of independence reaffirmed. The threat of subjugation has been met and turned back by their own hands. Far beyond Ethiopia's borders, the impact reverberates. Across Africa, where colonial domination seems unstoppable, the name Adwa becomes a beacon. Newspapers in Europe print astonished headlines. Leaders of distant nations take note. The victory challenges assumptions written into the politics of empire. It proves that industrial weapons and foreign discipline are not invincible, that determination, unity, and knowledge of the land can reshape history. For Ethiopians, the triumph is not an act of vengeance, but of affirmation. Menelik's commanders tend to the wounded from both sides. Prisoners are treated humanely. Envoys are sent to negotiate peace. The emperor knows that victory is not the end of struggle, but the beginning of responsibility. His nation has defended its independence, but now it must sustain it. In the weeks that follow, diplomacy resumes. The invading power formally recognizes Ethiopia's sovereignty, signing new treaties that confirm what the battlefield has already decided. Menelik's government continues to modernize, strengthening infrastructure and administration. The victory at Adwa becomes not only a military triumph, but a cornerstone of diplomacy, a moment when Ethiopia earns its seat among independent nations on equal terms. Years later, those who were there describe the battle not as glory, but as necessity. They remember the exhaustion, the dust, the fear, and the relief. Veterans speak of comrades lost, of the long marches before and after. Yet they also remember the quiet pride of that evening, the way the sky turned red as the sun set behind the mountains, and the way everyone, soldiers and villagers alike, stood together in silence, listening to the wind as if it carried the voices of ancestors. Adwa becomes more than a place, it becomes an idea, a symbol of what unity can achieve. Artists paint scenes of the battle in vivid colours. Poets write verses comparing it to the rising of the sun. In classrooms and gatherings, the story is told again and again, not as boast, but as reminder. The lesson is clear. Independence must be guarded not by isolation, but by awareness, adaptability, and shared purpose. For the wider world, Adwa marks a turning point in the perception of Africa. It is proof that the continent's peoples are not passive subjects of empire, but active shapers of their own fate. The battle enters global memory as one of resistance and dignity, its echoes reaching far beyond the mountains where it was fought. In time, it will inspire movements of independence across continents, its legacy carried by those who never set foot in Ethiopia but recognize themselves in its example. Today, the hills of Adwa are quiet again. The grass has grown back over the stones. The wind moves freely through the valleys. Only the outline of the ridges remains the same, their shapes unchanged since that day in 1896. Villagers still walk the paths once used by armies. They stop sometimes to look at the view where the land rolls out in waves of light and shadow, and they remember. At sunset, the mountains burn orange, the same colour as the dawn of battle long ago. The silence feels vast but alive, filled with the memory of what was achieved here. The Battle of Adwa was not the beginning of Ethiopia's strength, nor its end, but the moment when all the threads of its history, endurance, unity, and the will to remain free, came together in a single day. When night falls and the stars return, the same constellations shine above the hills as they did that morning. Their light touches the earth evenly, without favour or distinction. It is the same light under which the soldiers marched, the same that will shine on every generation after them. Adwa's victory endures not in stone or monument, but in that quiet illumination, a reminder that courage, once awakened, never truly fades. Morning breaks over Addis Ababa, and the capital hums with the sounds of a new century. The streets are alive with merchants, carriages, and the rhythmic ring of hammers from workshops. Ethiopia has emerged from the 19th century proud and unbowed, its independence secured on the hills of Adwa. Yet victory, though glorious, brings new responsibilities. The world beyond Africa is changing swiftly. Nations industrializing, technologies racing ahead, ideologies clashing. To remain independent in this new era, Ethiopia will need more than courage. It will need vision. That vision will belong to a man who comes of age in this moment of transition. His name is Tafari Makonnen, the son of a noble family, educated in both Ethiopian tradition and modern thought. From a young age, he shows a quiet intelligence, a calm that masks fierce determination. he studies administration, diplomacy, and languages. He believes Ethiopia can be both modern and true to itself, that progress need not erase heritage. Through a series of careful appointments and reforms, Tafari rises within the imperial court. By the 1920s, he becomes regent and heir to the throne, guiding policy while the aging Empress Zewditu still reigns. He travels abroad, to Jerusalem, Cairo, London, and Rome, the first Ethiopian leader to do so in centuries. Everywhere he goes, he observes, listens, and learns. He studies how nations organize their armies, their schools, their governments. When he returns home, he brings not imitation, but adaptation. We must open the windows, he says, so that fresh air may come in, but we must remain standing in our own house. In 1930, following Empress Zewditu's passing, he ascends the throne as Emperor Haile Selassie I. Power of the Trinity. The coronation is held in Addis Ababa, beneath a canopy of gold and white. Representatives from across the world attend. Diplomats, journalists, and dignitaries who have seldom seen Africa portrayed with such dignity and ceremony. The event is broadcast and photographed, introducing Ethiopia's emperor to an international audience. For many beyond its borders, it is their first image of an independent African nation, proud, sovereign, and ancient. Haile Selassie's early reign is marked by reform. He begins to modernize the state from within. Schools are opened in provincial towns. New roads are laid to connect regions. A constitution is drafted, defining rights, duties, and the framework of governance. The old systems of feudal privilege start to shift toward a central administration. For a society rooted in centuries of local authority, these changes are immense. Yet the emperor's tone is patient, never rushed. He believes progress must move with understanding. Addis Ababa, under his rule, transforms from a collection of dusty streets into a true capital, a city of embassies, universities, and ministries. Electric lights begin to glow over its avenues. Newspapers circulate, bringing information and debate. The sound of printing presses joins the traditional music that drifts from coffee houses. Ethiopia feels for the first time part of the modern rhythm of the world. Haile Selassie's reach extends beyond his borders. He joins the League of Nations, the first Ethiopian leader to participate actively in global diplomacy. At conferences and in correspondence, he presents his country as an equal member of the international community, not as a curiosity of history, but as a continuing civilization. His speeches are measured, his language precise. To foreign powers, he represents both continuity and change. An emperor from an ancient lineage who speaks fluently the language of modern statehood. But the 1930s are not a peaceful decade. Beyond Ethiopia, new storms gather. In Europe, expansionist powers dream of empire, their ambitions stretching toward Africa once more. In 1935, war returns to the Highlands. A massive foreign invasion begins, crossing the deserts from the north with modern aircraft and tanks. The emperor's appeals to the League of Nations go unanswered. The world hesitates. The same institutions that had celebrated Ethiopia's sovereignty now stand silent. Haile Selassie's armies fight bravely, but they are outmatched by weapons the Highlands have never seen. Poison gas falls from the sky. Villages burn. The emperor refuses to flee until the last possible moment, traveling from front to rally his soldiers. When defeat becomes unavoidable, he chooses exile not as escape, but as strategy. "We have lost a battle," he says, "but we have not lost the cause of freedom." In June 1936, Haile Selassie stands before the League of Nations in Geneva. Dressed in traditional Ethiopian robes, he addresses the assembled delegates in calm, deliberate tones. His words, though quiet, carry through the hall. He reminds the world that aggression against one nation endangers all. He asks not for sympathy, but for justice. It is a moment of profound moral clarity, one that will echo long after the speeches of stronger nations are forgotten. Yet the world does not act. The emperor leaves Geneva knowing that for now, Ethiopia stands alone. During the years of occupation that follow, resistance never ceases. In the mountains, local fighters wage a persistent campaign, moving by night, surviving on courage and faith. They carry the same spirit that once rose at Adwa, the unyielding refusal to accept domination. From exile, Haile Selassie continues to work, writing letters, coordinating diplomacy, and reminding the world that Ethiopia still exists. His image becomes a symbol of endurance, an emperor without a throne, but not without a nation. In 1941, after 5 years of struggle, the tides of global war turn. Allied forces advance from the south. Ethiopian resistance rises from within. When Haile Selassie re-enters Addis Ababa on May 5th, the streets are lined with crowds. The city he left in sorrow now greets him with flowers and song. For many, it feels like a second Adwa, not a victory of arms alone, but of will. The emperor returns to a homeland scarred but unbroken, ready once more to rebuild. The post-war years bring transformation. Haile Selassie intensifies his efforts to modernize Ethiopia. Universities are founded, students study abroad, women enter public life in growing numbers. Ministries and legal systems are reorganized. The emperor encourages the growth of industry and the introduction of new technologies. Addis Ababa becomes a crossroads of ideas, African, Middle Eastern, and European. The city hums with the confidence of renewal. Beyond national borders, Haile Selassie becomes a leading voice for continental unity. He hosts gatherings of African leaders in Addis Ababa, advocating for cooperation among newly independent states. His vision is of an Africa that defines its own future, united not by uniformity but by shared purpose. In 1963, his efforts culminate in the founding of the Organization of African Unity, headquartered in Addis Ababa. The city, once called New Flower, becomes the political heart of a continent in motion. Through it all, the emperor maintains his measured composure, a balance between tradition and reform, ceremony and pragmatism. Yet time brings new pressures. The modern world is changing faster than ever, and the gap between ancient hierarchy and youthful expectation widens. Economic strain, political unrest, and social inequality begin to surface. The emperor, now elderly, remains a figure of immense respect, but faces the challenges of a nation impatient for transformation. In 1974, after more than 4 decades on the throne, Haile Selassie is deposed in a military coup. It is the end of an era. The old empire gives way to a republic, and the Lion of Judah, once the symbol of continuity, is gone. Yet even in departure, his influence endures. The institutions he built, the schools he founded, the idea of an Ethiopia engaged with the world, all remain part of the nation's identity. His reign, with all its triumphs and contradictions, marks the bridge between the world of empire and the age of modern statehood. Outside Ethiopia, Haile Selassie's image takes on a life of its own. Across oceans, he becomes an icon of dignity and resistance. celebrated in song and faith. To many around the world, he represents the spirit of independence that defied empire and inspired generations to believe in the possibility of self-determination. Today, the memory of Haile Selassie is complex but enduring. In the old palaces of Addis Ababa, his portraits still hang. In the archives, his letters remain meticulously preserved. His legacy is debated, yet no one denies his imprint. He ruled through the most turbulent century of modern history and carried Ethiopia across its threshold. As the sun sets over the city he built, the streets glow in the amber light of evening. The distant hills shimmer under clouds of dust. Somewhere, the bells of old churches ring out across the skyline, mingling with the hum of traffic, the sound of past and present sharing the same air. The world has changed beyond recognition, but the echo of his era remains. The era when a mountain kingdom stood before the world and proved that it could not only survive history, but shape it. The highlands are quiet before the storm. From the hills above Addis Ababa, the horizon looks endless. Rolling plains, scattered villages, the soft curve of the rivers that feed the valleys. But beyond that, calm lies gathering tension. The 20th century has entered its darkest decade, and the air across the world hums with uncertainty. For Ethiopia, the storm will come not as rumour, but as thunder, iron and fire descending from the sky. It begins in the mid-1930s, when ambition and empire reach again toward Africa. The world is distracted by its own economic turmoil. The great powers argue but take little action. On the far shores of the Red Sea, armies mobilize. Ships load tanks, aircraft, and troops. The invasion of Ethiopia is planned with clinical precision, a campaign meant to expand borders and erase resistance. To the invaders, this land appears remote, a place that can be claimed as easily as drawn on a map. But Ethiopia is no blank space. It is a nation whose memory runs deeper than its roads, whose people have learned to outlast every conqueror that has ever looked upon its mountains. In the autumn of 1935, the first bombs fall on the northern frontier. Columns of foreign troops cross the deserts, advancing toward the highlands. From the first day, the war feels uneven. Tanks against rifles, aircraft against open fields. Villages are emptied as families flee into the hills. The earth itself seems to tremble under the march of mechanized armies. Yet from those same hills rise the echoes of defiance. Every valley, every mountain pass becomes a line of resistance. The Ethiopian forces are a patchwork of regions and loyalties. Farmers, shepherds, and soldiers fighting side by side. Their commanders know the terrain as intimately as they know the patterns of the rain. They strike quickly and vanish, their movements invisible to maps. They rely on courage, on endurance, and on the unyielding belief that the land itself is an ally. In the early months, their determination slows the advance, turning what was expected to be an easy conquest into a grueling struggle. The invaders respond with devastation. Aircraft sweep over towns, dropping not only explosives, but gas, a weapon banned by international law. Forests are burned to clear hiding places. Rivers are poisoned. The world watches through newspaper headlines and radio reports, shocked but motionless. In Geneva, the League of Nations debates and condemns, but its words carry no teeth. Ethiopia stands alone. In Addis Ababa, Emperor Haile Selassie refuses to yield. He moves among his people, visiting hospitals and refugee camps, his composure unbroken even as the capital prepares for siege. But he understands strategy as well as symbolism. To continue the fight, Ethiopia will need a voice beyond its borders. He decides to leave, not to flee, but to speak. Before departing, he gathers his officials and tells them, "I will return, but the nation must never surrender." The land will defend itself. Then he travels by road and rail to the port, crossing the Red Sea into exile. In the months that follow, Addis Ababa falls. Foreign flags rise over government buildings. Parades of soldiers march through the streets. Propaganda declares victory, but beneath the banners, silence holds. For the occupiers, control proves far harder than conquest. The Ethiopian countryside does not bend. Resistance continues from the mountains, coordinated by local leaders and bands of fighters known as the Arbegnoch, patriots. They strike at convoys, sabotage railways, and vanish into the forests. Their weapons are few, their supplies meagre, but their determination is inexhaustible. The occupiers hold the cities by day, but the land itself belongs to those who know it by heart. In the villages, ordinary people sustain the fight. Farmers hide weapons under piles of grain. Messengers carry news and supplies through secret routes. Women tend to the wounded and gather intelligence under the guise of trade. Every generation finds its role in the struggle. The resistance is not a single army, but a nation scattered and united at once, surviving through silence and memory. Meanwhile, far away in Europe, the exiled emperor carries his country's cause to every court that will listen. He writes letters, delivers speeches, and pleads for justice. His presence becomes a symbol, an emperor without a throne, representing not only Ethiopia, but the principle of sovereignty itself. His words reach classrooms, newspapers, and churches around the world, awakening sympathy among ordinary people, if not yet among governments. Slowly, quietly, he wins allies who will matter when the global balance shifts. The occupation, intended to last forever, begins to crack within a few years. The terrain proves impossible to control. The cost of maintaining garrisons in every province drains the invaders' strength. Each act of suppression breeds new defiance. The arrogance of empire meets the endurance of geography, and the highlands prevail by simply existing, by being too vast, too rugged, too determined to be possessed. Then the world itself changes. In 1939, global war erupts, alliances shatter, and the map of power is rewritten. By 1940, the tide has begun to turn in East Africa. New armies move across the deserts from the south, forces of the Allied powers joined by Ethiopian patriots. Among them marches the emperor, returning at last to the land he left in sorrow. As his convoy crosses the border, villagers line the roads, holding branches and singing. The soldiers of the resistance, hardened by years of struggle, greet him with quiet tears. They have kept their promise. The land has defended itself. The campaign to reclaim Ethiopia is swift and relentless. In province after province, the occupiers retreat. Towns raise their flags again. The highlands echo with the sound of church bells and gunfire, celebration and battle intertwined. By the spring of 1941, the capital is free. Haile Selassie re-enters Addis Ababa on horseback, dressed not in royal splendor, but in the uniform of a soldier. The streets are lined with cheering crowds, their voices rising like a single breath after years underwater. The emperor addresses them simply. Ethiopia has been redeemed. Liberation brings relief, but also reckoning. The war has left scars, villages destroyed, families separated, forests burned. Yet amid the ruins, a new sense of unity takes hold. The people have rediscovered their strength in one another. For the first time in memory, every class, region, and faith has shared the same struggle. From this shared endurance, a deeper idea of nationhood is born, one rooted not in kingship or empire, but in the collective will to remain free. In the years after the war, Ethiopia rebuilds quickly. Roads and railways are repaired, schools and hospitals reopen. The emperor's government re-establishes its institutions, this time with lessons learned from exile and resistance. Diplomacy resumes on stronger footing. When world leaders gather again to design a new international order, Ethiopia's seat is no longer questioned. The nation that once stood alone now stands among equals. The memory of the invasion remains, carried in songs, in stories told around fires, in the quiet dignity of survivors. Across Africa and beyond, Ethiopia's resilience becomes an emblem of defiance against domination. For those still under colonial rule, its victory and restoration serve as proof that independence can return even after conquest. The phrase, "Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands," begins to sound not like prophecy, but like history unfolding. Today, the remnants of that war lie scattered across the highlands, rusted helmets, half buried in grass, fragments of stone fortifications hidden in forest shade. Shepherds pass them without notice, their flocks grazing where soldiers once fell. The land, as always, absorbs what history leaves behind. It does not forget, but it forgives, growing green again each rainy season. When the wind rises over the mountains at dusk, it carries the faint sound of distant bells and the soft rhythm of hooves. The echoes seem to mingle, the cavalry of Menelik, the patriots of Adwa, the guerrillas of the resistance, all part of one long story of endurance. The storms that came from beyond the sea have passed, but the highlands remain, scarred yet steadfast. Ethiopia's resistance during those years was more than a war. It was a reaffirmation of identity, a declaration whispered from mountain to mountain that the land and its people were inseparable. Empires can rise and fall, but the soil remembers its own name. When night falls across the ridges and the stars return, their light touches the same valleys where fighters once waited in silence. It shines on a land that has endured conquest, exile, and return, and still stands, its mountains as old as freedom itself. Evening settles over Addis Ababa, the air thick with wood smoke and restless talk. The city has changed. The skyline of palaces and ministries stands beside new apartment blocks and factories. Cars wind along streets that once held only horses. Radios crackle in cafes, spreading news from distant continents. It is the 1970s, and Ethiopia is no longer a remote highland empire. It is a country drawn into the currents of a rapidly changing world. For generations, the monarchy has been the symbol of unity, its image carried through wars and victories, its ruler seen as the living link between past and future. But beneath that symbol, tensions have grown. The population has increased, the cities have swollen, and expectations have changed. Education, once a privilege, has opened new eyes. Students read about revolutions abroad, about equality and reform, and return home asking questions their elders cannot easily answer. Rural life remains harsh. Land belongs to the few, while millions of farmers struggle with drought, debt, and distance from power. The gap between tradition and modernity widens into something that feels like two different worlds. The drought of 1973 exposes this divide completely. In the northern provinces, the rain fails, the soil cracks, crops wither. Thousands die before aid can reach them. News spreads slowly at first, then with fury. Images of famine reach the cities, where people cannot reconcile such suffering with the image of national pride. Protest begins quietly, in universities, in printing presses, in sermons, and then becomes impossible to ignore. The empire that had endured invasions and exiles now faces a challenge from within: the demand for change. In early 1974, soldiers mutiny over unpaid wages. Their rebellion sparks others. Factories strike, teachers march, civil servants stop work. The protests that fill the streets of Addis Ababa are not coordinated, but share a single pulse: impatience. After 4 decades on the throne, Emperor Haile Selassie remains a respected figure, but his government seems unable to grasp the scale of discontent. The machinery of the state creaks under pressure, uncertain whether to reform or defend itself. In the confusion, power begins to drift away from the center. What follows is not a single revolution, but a series of collisions. A committee of military officers forms to restore order. It calls itself the Derg, meaning council. At first, it promises reform, redistribution of land, an end to corruption, a government that listens. But revolution, once awakened, rarely stops at its first goal. The Derg consolidates control, purging rivals and silencing dissent. What began as the voice of the people becomes a struggle for power, fought in the name of ideology. In September 1974, Haile Selassie is deposed. The monarchy that had lasted for centuries ends not with ceremony, but with the sound of soldiers at the palace gates. The emperor, frail but composed, is led away into house arrest. For those who watch, it feels like the closing of an age, the disappearance of the old Ethiopia into the shadows of the modern one. The people who had once cheered his return from exile now stand in uneasy silence, unsure whether to mourn or to hope. The Derg declares Ethiopia a republic and announces sweeping reforms. Land, it proclaims, will belong to those who till it. Feudal taxes and titles are abolished. The language of revolution fills newspapers and speeches: equality, unity, progress. For a moment, optimism flickers. Peasants dance in villages as officials read out proclamations of land redistribution. Students volunteer to teach literacy in the countryside. The capital hums with slogans painted on walls and the energy of change. Yet beneath the surface, new uncertainties grow. Reform soon hardens into control. Political factions that once supported the revolution splinter and turn on one another. Intellectuals debate ideology in classrooms and cafes, but disagreement quickly becomes dangerous. The Derg, led by Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, tightens its grip. Opposition is labelled treason. The early rhetoric of liberation gives way to fear. In 1977, a wave of purges known as the Red Terror sweeps through the cities. Posters demanding loyalty cover the walls. Gunfire punctuates the nights. Thousands disappear into prisons or shallow graves. The promise of equality is drowned in suspicion. At the same time, the countryside faces new trials. Drought returns, worsened by war and mismanagement. Villages once united by necessity are now divided by politics. Whole communities are resettled in the name of development. In the north, armed resistance movements take root, demanding autonomy or independence. The government responds with force. The result is a country at war with itself, stretched between ideology and geography, between survival and belief. For ordinary Ethiopians, life becomes a test of endurance. In the cities, families ration food and whisper news in private. In rural areas, farmers harvest what they can, sharing seed and hope between neighbours. Teachers continue to hold lessons under trees. Doctors travel on foot to reach remote clinics. Even in the darkest years, the rhythm of daily life persists. Children born, crops planted, songs sung quietly at night. The people's resilience becomes the country's true government when politics fails them. Outside Ethiopia, the world watches through the lens of Cold War rivalry. Foreign powers provide aid, arms, and ideology, turning the Highlands into another theatre of global competition. The Derg aligns itself with socialist states. Advisors and weaponry arrive from abroad. The country becomes a crossroads of competing influences, Western, Eastern, African, all claiming to offer progress, none understanding the complexity of its soul. By the mid-1980s, famine returns on a scale unseen in modern memory. Drought, war, and policy combine into catastrophe. Images of starving children reach television screens around the world, stirring unprecedented humanitarian response. Planes filled with food and medicine arrive in waves, bringing both relief and sorrow. The Highlands, once the symbol of endurance, now appear to outsiders as a land of tragedy. Yet within Ethiopia, people refuse the label of victimhood. Volunteers organize local relief, elders guide communities through scarcity, and songs of survival spread through the camps. Even in despair, the spirit of endurance persists. As the decade ends, the Derg begins to fracture under its own weight. Economic decline deepens, wars on multiple fronts drain its strength, and belief in its ideology fades. Across the country, resistance grows bolder. Movements from the north and south advance toward the centre, not as conquerors, but as heirs to a long struggle for self-determination. The government responds with repression, but each act of force seems to hasten its collapse. In 1991, after 17 turbulent years, the Derg falls. Mengistu flees the country. The soldiers who once spoke of revolution leave behind empty offices and quiet streets. A transitional government forms, promising democracy, reconstruction, and peace. The end of dictatorship feels less like triumph than exhaustion, a long breath after years spent underwater. The people, scarred but alive, face the challenge of building once again from ruin. When the dust settles, the Highlands stand as they always have, scarred, beautiful, enduring. The rivers still cut their paths through stone. The mountains still hold the clouds. The history written during these years is heavy with suffering, yet within it lies continuity. Each generation has faced its storm and found a way through. The empire fell, the republic rose, the ideology burned, but the rhythm of life never stopped. In the countryside, where news once travelled slowly, the farmers return to their terraces. They rebuild houses, mend tools, and plant again. In the cities, students walk past the old statues of emperors and generals, carrying notebooks and new hopes. Music fills the cafes once more, a mixture of sorrow and pride. The past, though painful, has become a teacher rather than a prison. As night descends over the highlands, the lights of Addis Ababa flicker across the valley. Some belong to offices and ministries reborn, others to homes where families share bread by candlelight. The city's skyline, scarred by history, glows with the resilience of a people who refuse to vanish. The storms of revolution have passed, leaving behind both ruin and renewal. Out of the shadows rises a simple truth. Ethiopia has endured everything the world could throw against it, and still it stands. When the wind moves through the mountains at midnight, it carries the scent of rain and soil, the same as it did centuries ago. The land does not speak of ideologies or rulers. It remembers only persistence. Empires fall, governments change, ideas come and go. But the earth remains steady beneath the feet of those who till it. The years of revolution are now memory, yet the spirit that survived them is still alive, quiet, strong, and waiting for dawn. The morning sun rises slowly over the Ethiopian highlands, spilling light across a landscape that has carried the weight of history longer than most of the world has drawn breath. The mountains are quiet, the air clean and thin. From the ridges, one can see layers of valleys fading into haze, each one a chapter of time. It is the same light that once touched the walls of Aksum, the same wind that whispered through Lalibela's carved halls, the same soil that bore the footprints of kings, soldiers, monks, and farmers. Yet it is also new, washing over a nation that now stands in the modern world, alive and evolving, its roots sunk deep into eternity. The 20th century has left Ethiopia transformed. Empires, revolutions, and reforms have passed across its surface like seasons. Each era has added something, ideas, scars, lessons, and what remains is not the wreckage of the past, but its fusion. A country old enough to have seen everything, young enough still to dream. Addis Ababa hums with traffic and ambition. Children in uniforms hurry to school. Traders call across the markets. Radio music drifts from open doors. In offices and classrooms, computers glow where once the click of typewriters marked progress. The city pulses with contradictions. Old stone beside glass, traditional rhythms beside electronic beats. But this contrast is its balance, its proof of survival. Beyond the capital, the countryside follows its own patient rhythm. Farmers still plough the highland terraces with oxen, tracing the same curves their ancestors carved generations ago. The soil is dark and fragrant after rain, the hillsides bright with teff and barley. In the evenings, fires light up the villages, and stories return to life. The elders tell of past battles, of lost kings and found courage. They speak of Aksum's golden obelisks, of the builders of Lalibela, of emperors who dreamed of unity, and of the long seasons when endurance was the only empire that mattered. The children listen, wide-eyed, learning the lesson their land teaches best. That time bends, but it does not break. Ethiopia's identity has always been a conversation between its many peoples. More than 80 languages flow across its borders, each with its own music, each describing the land in a different tongue. The mountains of the north speak in one rhythm, the plains of the east in another, the forests of the southwest in yet another. Traders, herders, and farmers meet in markets where these sounds overlap, forming a living symphony of difference. It is not always harmonious. Difference can sharpen as easily as it blends. Yet out of this complexity grows something enduring. A shared understanding that diversity itself is the country's inheritance. Ethiopia's unity has never been sameness. It has always been coexistence. The generations born after the revolutions inherit a landscape filled with both challenge and promise. They grow up with roads and electricity, but also with memory. They study the world through the internet and through the oral histories of their elders. They learn of Aksum not just from archaeology, but from family pride. They speak of Adwa as if they had been there themselves. For them, History is not a distant story, but a living companion. It stands behind them, like the mountains at their backs, immense, steady, and protective. In the cities, new voices fill the air. Artists paint the old legends in modern forms. Musicians blend ancestral instruments with electric guitars. Writers record the experiences of migration and return, of loss and rebirth. The culture stretches outward, engaging the world while retaining its distinct cadence. Diaspora communities across oceans send back ideas, investments, and songs. In the cafes of Addis Ababa, one can hear languages from across the globe, all finding rhythm in the same pulse of conversation. Ethiopia, once a kingdom of stone, now exists also as a network of hearts and memories scattered far beyond its mountains. The nation's progress is not without struggle. Modernization brings its own storms, conflicts of identity, debates over representation, economic hardship, and the fragile work of democracy. Yet the people approach these challenges as they have always approached hardship, not with despair, but with endurance. The same instinct that preserved the Highlands through drought and war now guides it through the politics of the present. Patience remains Ethiopia's most radical act. Travellers who cross the country today still find traces of every era layered like sediment. In the north, the stelae of Aksum cast long shadows over the fields. In Lalibela, the rock-hewn churches echo with low chanting that has not changed for centuries. In Gondar, the castles of emperors rise above the hills, their stone walls softened by moss. In the southern valleys, ancient traditions of weaving and dance thrive beside bustling new towns. Everywhere, the old and the new coexist, as if time were a circle rather than a line. To move through Ethiopia is to walk through living history, to feel, with each step, that the past still breathes beneath the soil. In the nation's museums and archives, curators handle artifacts once carried through wars and ceremonies. The care they take in preserving them is quiet but profound. Each object, a crown, a tool, a manuscript, a simple bowl, tells a story of continuity. The same attention is given to oral histories recorded on digital devices, to songs sung by elders in remote villages, to the photographs of students building new futures. In a world obsessed with speed, Ethiopia remains a country where time is layered, where yesterday and tomorrow can meet at the same table. Modern Ethiopia also looks outward with a confidence born from survival. It takes part in regional diplomacy, in science, in art, in the weaving of global networks. Its capital, Addis Ababa, still serves as the seat of continental cooperation, hosting the African Union and conferences that gather leaders from across the continent. The ideals once spoken by Haile Selassie, cooperation, sovereignty, and unity, find new life in the halls of modern institutions. The old kingdom that once stood alone now stands among many, its voice calm but certain. And yet, for all the transformation, the land remains the ultimate anchor. The mountains have outlasted every flag and every ideology. The rivers that cut through the highlands still dictate the rhythm of planting and harvest. Even in the heart of the modern city, the scent of rain on dry soil can stop a conversation, reminding everyone of what endures. The Ethiopian story is not one of unbroken triumph. It is the story of continuity through change, of holding one's center while the world shifts around it. When dusk falls over the country, the landscape turns to gold. The fields shimmer, the distant mountains glow violet. In the cities, the lights come on one by one, Small stars scattered across the valleys. In villages, fires burn in courtyards while people gather to eat, to talk, to laugh. Children run between the shadows, their laughter echoing against the walls. The air cools, the day folds into memory, and another chapter begins. Quietly, without fanfare, as it has for thousands of years. Ethiopia endures because its strength has never depended on one generation or one idea. It lies in the steady rhythm of work, in the humility of the farmer, the craft of the builder, the voice of the storyteller. It lies in the way each crisis becomes part of the fabric of identity rather than its undoing. The empire became a republic, the mountains became cities, the songs changed their instruments, but the melody remains. At night, the stars above the highlands are as clear as ever. Travellers who look up at them can imagine those same constellations shining over the ancient kingdom of Aksum, over the artisans of Lalibela, over the soldiers of Adwa and the patriots of the resistance. The light has crossed millennia, unchanged, falling on the same land, on the same enduring spirit. In that continuity lies Ethiopia's quiet greatness, not in the noise of conquest, but in the persistence of being. As midnight approaches, the wind moves gently through the valleys, carrying the smell of rain and earth. The fields whisper, the rivers gleam faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, marking the passage of another hour in a country that measures time differently than the rest of the world. Its heart beats in centuries, not minutes. The dawn that will follow is not just the start of a new day, but the continuation of an unbroken story, one written in stone, in song, in memory. The eternal kingdom endures, not as a relic of the past, but as a living idea. That identity is strongest when it bends with time, and that a nation, like the mountains that cradle it, can remain eternal precisely because it is always changing.